How did telescopes shift Mars from mythic omen to tangible world? Why did early spacecraft images both shatter canal myths and spark deeper scientific questions? In the quiet of a clear night, under an endless dome of stars, a small red light glows softly in the sky. Mars, distant, rust-coloured, and mysterious, has beckoned to human imagination since ancient times. It does not shine as bright as Venus or Jupiter, but its subtle crimson hue and steady presence have a peculiar power. For millennia, people have looked up at that red wandering star and felt a mixture of wonder and unease, sensing that it was something different, something important looming just beyond reach. Long ago, our ancestors gave the wandering red star many names. The Babylonians called it Nergal, after their deity of fire and war, seeing in its blood-red sparkle an omen of conflict. To the Greeks and Romans, it was Ares, or Mars, the god of war, dragging his gleaming shield across the heavens. In ancient China, they spoke of the fire star, a celestial flame whose appearance was said to foretell upheaval. Everywhere, Mars was a symbol of fire and blood, passion and battle, a bright ember of the divine flickering in the night. Yet it was also a source of deep curiosity. What was this fiery point of light, and why did it wander the sky unlike the fixed stars? Night after night, generation after generation, eyes watched Mars slowly move against the starry background. Ancient astronomers charted its path and noted its strange behavior. Most of the time, Mars inched forward along a predictable course, but now and then it would pause and drift backward for weeks before resuming its forward dance. This bewildering loop in the heavens, what we now call retrograde motion, must have seemed like the red planet was playing tricks, a celestial dancer stepping out of time. To those early sky watchers, Mars was alive with mystery, a wandering god or a heavenly omen that refused to be ordinary. Around campfires and under temple roofs, people spun stories and myths around the red wanderer. They imagined gods driving chariots across the sky, or cosmic battles fought on that distant orb. Mars kindled the human spirit of storytelling as much as it stirred our scientific curiosity. In quiet whispers, perhaps some even dreamed of what it would be like to visit that crimson world shining above. The idea was far beyond reach, yet the seed of longing was there. The notion that Mars was not just a star, but a place, another world that might hold secrets of its own. Centuries passed. The red light kept appearing every night, unwavering, unblinking, silently keeping its watch. Humanity's dreams of Mars stayed alive in myths and in the simple act of gazing upward in wonder. But it would be a long time before we truly understood what Mars was. The ancients could only guess and imagine. Mars remained a beautiful mystery, a beacon of the unknown, and as the ages rolled on, our curiosity only grew stronger. We yearned to see Mars more clearly, to know it not just as a pinpoint of light, but as a world in its own right. The stage was slowly being set for us to take our first real look at our mysterious neighbour. Many centuries later, our ingenuity provided new eyes to gaze at Mars. The invention of the telescope in the early 17th century transformed that tiny red dot into a small disk, hinting at a world with features and form. Early astronomers aimed their telescopes at Mars whenever it came closest to Earth, straining to discern any detail. Through those primitive lenses, Mars began to reveal itself by degrees. They saw faint, darker patches on its surface that shifted over time. And at the poles, they noticed bright white spots that grew and shrank with the seasons. Could those be ice caps made of snow? The thought was astonishing. Mars might have polar ice like Earth, and perhaps even seasons of melting and freezing. Bit by bit, the red planet was becoming more than a myth. It was becoming a place, with geography and climate of its own. As telescopes improved in the 1800s, observers reported even more tantalizing features. Some believed they saw long, thin lines crisscrossing the planet's surface. An Italian astronomer described these as canali, meaning channels, but the word was mistranslated in English as canals, implying artificial waterways. That single word ignited imaginations worldwide. Suddenly, people wondered if Mars was a dying world, where intelligent beings had dug canals to draw water from the polar caps down to their parched cities. Drawings of Mars from that era show a network of straight lines connecting dark regions, like some alien irrigation map. Though we later learned it was an optical illusion, tricks of the eye and hope combined, at the time, it felt as if we were on the verge of meeting our cosmic neighbours. By the late 19th and early 20th century, public fascination with Mars was at a fever pitch. Influential astronomers like Percival Lowell became vocal champions of the idea that Mars was inhabited. Lowell spent night after night at his observatory in Arizona, sketching what he believed were canals built by Martians. His books described a planet where an ancient civilization struggled to survive as their world dried up. These notions captured the public's imagination. Mars was no longer just a distant light. It was a world that might be teeming with life, or at least home to an advanced, if desperate, society. However, seeing through Earth's turbulent atmosphere was like peering through rippling water. Even our best telescopes could not give a clear picture of Mars's true nature. Some astronomers doubted the canals, seeing only natural features and perhaps wishful thinking. But definitive answers remained elusive. Mars kept its secrets behind a veil of rust-coloured haze, tantalizing and frustrating in equal measure. We needed to get closer still, to pierce the blur and truly discover what was real on that distant world. That chance finally came in the 20th century, when technology allowed us to leave Earth and journey across the void. The space age dawned, and with it came the first robotic explorers sent toward Mars. In the 1960s, humankind built small, brave spacecraft to fly by the red planet and take our first close-up images. One early probe, traveling for months through the darkness, finally swept past Mars in 1965. As it whizzed by, it snapped photographs with a simple camera, capturing humanity's very first close look at the Martian surface. Those pictures, transmitted back across millions of kilometers, were eagerly awaited on Earth. When they arrived, the world held its breath and then let out a collective sigh. Mars looked quiet and barren, more like our moon than a world of canals and cities. The images showed craters and bleak expanses where we had hoped to see signs of life, or at least lush vegetation. It was a humbling moment. The Mars of fact seemed starkly different from the Mars of our imaginations. Yet there was beauty, even in that barrenness. The photographs revealed intricate patterns of light and shadow, the texture of ancient craters carved by impacts eons ago. We realized Mars had a rich history written in its land, a story of meteor strikes and a world that had been geologically active. And there were hints of more, a glimpse of a winding canyon, a broad sweep of plains. The flyby gave us only a few snapshots, but enough to spark new questions. What created those craters and canyons? Was Mars truly dead, or could life be hiding somewhere beyond our camera's reach? Determined to learn more, we sent additional probes. Some swung into orbit around Mars, mapping it from above. In 1971, an orbiter arrived just as a global dust storm had wrapped the planet in a hazy cloak. For weeks, it could see nothing but a reddish blur. Then the dust settled, and what emerged astonished scientists. Towering extinct volcanoes, taller than any mountain on Earth, and a canyon system that ran for thousands of kilometers across Mars's face. This Great Canyon, far deeper and longer than our Grand Canyon, revealed that Mars had once been a dynamic planet, with forces capable of heaving its crust and shaping titanic landscapes. We finally saw Mars as a world of its own, with features on a scale that made us marvel. The next bold step was to reach out and touch the surface itself. In 1976, 2 robotic landers descended through the thin Martian atmosphere and gently came to rest on the ground. For the first time, a machine from Earth stood on the red soil of Mars and looked around with human eyes by proxy. The sky was butterscotch-coloured, and the ground strewn with rocks stretching to a distant horizon. One lander sat down on a broad plain, the other near a rolling dune field. Their cameras panned across a landscape that was eerily quiet and empty. No canals, no structures, just wind-carved rocks and a deep orange sky. It was beautiful in its stillness, a silent panorama untouched by any life that we could see. These landers extended mechanical arms to scoop up Martian soil, performing experiments right there on the alien ground. They were searching for any hint of microscopic life in the dirt. The results came back puzzling, but ultimately offered no clear evidence of living organisms. If life existed on Mars, it was either hidden well beneath the surface, or perhaps long gone. For most scientists, the conclusion was that Mars, at least on its surface, seemed inhospitable and likely barren. It was another sobering revelation. The romantic notion of a thriving Martian civilization evaporated like a mirage, replaced by the reality of a cold, quiet desert world. Still, the mystery of Mars only deepened. We had answers, yes, but also new questions we hadn't known to ask. The more we saw of Mars, the more we wanted to know how it came to be this way. Dry canals or not, something had shaped that planet into the silent place we were exploring. Where did the water go that might have carved those canyons? What caused those giant volcanoes to rise and then die out? Was Mars always so cold and dry, or had it seen warmer, wetter days in its ancient past? The red planet's allure endured, transformed but undiminished. It was no longer the imaginary Mars of ancient war gods or fanciful aliens. It was something real, with its own stark beauty and its own set of secrets waiting to be discovered. As the 1980s dawned, Mars hung above in the night sky as it always had, red and inscrutable. We had taken our first close looks and learned so much, yet the red planet remained distant and enigmatic. In our laboratories and observatories on Earth, scientists pored over the data and images sent back by our probes and landers. The initial rush of discovery gradually settled into careful study. Mars was starting to share its story, a tale of a small, rocky world shaped by time and elements, of possibilities lost or preserved in ice and stone. And even as we studied those first findings, a part of us continued to dream. The human imagination had been stirred anew, and it would soon return to fill in the gaps where evidence was still sparse. Before we finally set foot on Mars, we would journey there again and again in our minds and in our stories. Even as science was peeling away Mars's mysteries, human imagination was painting the planet with bold colours of its own, Long before any person could go, we travelled to Mars in our dreams, in myths, and later in fiction. In the late 19th century, when those supposed canals were first reported, Mars fever gripped the public. It felt plausible to many that intelligent Martians existed, perhaps struggling to survive on a drying world. This idea inspired one of the earliest and most famous tales of Mars, a story of Martians leaving their planet to make war on ours. In that Victorian-era novel, invaders from Mars ride in towering machines and unleash fearsome weapons on Earth, a dramatic reflection of our anxieties and fascinations. The story was fiction, yet on one chilly October night, decades later, its power blurred into reality. A radio broadcast of that Martian invasion tale was presented as a series of urgent news bulletins. Some listeners, tuned in late and unaware it was a drama, panicked at the thought that creatures from the Red Planet were truly laying waste to our cities. It was perhaps the most sensational example of how deeply Mars had embedded itself in the human psyche. Not all visions of Mars were terrifying, however. Many were filled with wonder, even hope. Writers imagined Mars as a place of ancient wisdom or adventure. Early science fiction pulps carried fanciful stories of intrepid Earthlings rocketing to Mars and finding it teeming with exotic life forms, four-armed warriors, beautiful alien princesses, and fantastical creatures under twin moons. Such tales were vivid and strange, more fantasy than science, yet they captured the thrill of the unknown. Mars became a backdrop for heroic quests and romantic sagas, a stage where the human spirit of exploration could play out without the limits of Earth. As the 20th century progressed, and science gave us more clues, the fiction evolved too. By the mid-1900s, some storytellers took a more thoughtful approach. One famous collection of tales portrayed the first human expeditions to Mars as poetic, haunting encounters. In those stories, astronauts found a world of wind-swept deserts and silent, empty towns. A Mars where an ancient native civilization had mysteriously faded away. The humans arriving there experienced loneliness, nostalgia, and strange dreams under the pale Martian sky. These narratives weren't about conquering aliens or swashbuckling adventures, but about reflection, the melancholy and wonder of meeting a frontier that was at once beautiful and forlorn. Through such stories, Mars became a mirror, reflecting back our own hopes, fears, and the bittersweet longing for something beyond our world. By the latter half of the 20th century, when our spacecraft were revealing the real Mars to be stark and quiet, we began to adjust our stories. No longer could we imagine grand canals or bustling Martian cities. Those had been dispelled by the cold facts. Instead, new stories asked different questions. If Mars is barren now, might it have had life long ago? If humans go there, how will the planet change them? And how will they change the planet? The tone shifted from seeing Mars as inhabited by others to seeing it as a place we ourselves might inhabit. In fiction, Mars gradually transformed from the home of imagined beings to a frontier waiting for human footsteps. But whether the stories were about ancient Martians or future colonists, that slight aura of mystery remained. Mars, in our tales, never lost its sense of enchantment. It was always a place that could surprise us, a backdrop for the extraordinary. In a way, these visions of red soil and pink skies helped keep us dreaming during the long pause when Mars was only visited by robots. They bridged the gap between our eagerness and our ability. While engineers and scientists methodically planned real missions, the dreamers and writers made sure Mars stayed vivid in our collective mind. So by the time technology was ready to send new explorers, machines at first, and eventually humans, our hearts were already there, roaming the imagined Martian landscapes alongside our story's characters. Mars lived simultaneously in fact and fiction, and each influenced the other. Our fantasies led us to search for certain things, and what we found, or didn't find, in turn inspired new fantasies. It was a dialogue of curiosity between what is and what might be. And soon enough, the era of pure imagination would give way to an era of hands-on exploration once more. As the 21st century approached, we stood on the cusp of truly exploring Mars in person. Before humans could go, however, our trusty mechanical envoys would go first, paving the way. The stage was set for Mars to be seen through new eyes again, this time eyes on wheels, crawling slowly but surely over the alien ground, bringing us all along for the ride. True to those dreams, as the new century arrived, we returned to Mars, not just with cameras on orbiters, but with rovers, robotic explorers on wheels that could wander the landscape. In 1997, a tiny rover, no larger than a child's wagon, became the first to roll across Martian ground. It moved cautiously, a little machine venturing bravely into the unknown, controlled by engineers millions of kilometers away. This rover, only the size of a toy, trundled around a landing site called Ares Vallis, a broad, rocky plain. It took colour photographs of its own tracks in the reddish dust and the scattered stones around it. For a few weeks, it sent back images and data, showing us the close-up texture of Martian rocks and soil. Though its journey was short and limited, it proved that we could, in a sense, walk on Mars through our robotic proxy. For the first time, we were not just gazing at Mars or touching down in one spot. We were exploring it, step by step, wheel turn by wheel turn. Encouraged by that success, we sent more rovers, each larger and more capable than the last. In 2004, a pair of twin rovers arrived on opposite sides of Mars. They bounced to the surface, encased in giant airbags, then unfolded their solar panels under the alien sun. Once they drove off their landing platforms, the age of roving exploration truly began. These twins, despite being built alike, landed in very different places. One in a vast crater that once might have held a lake, and the other on a plateau near the planet's equator. Day after day, month after month, they wandered across the silent terrain. They photographed everything, their own wheel tracks winding over dusty dunes, strange-shaped rocks that hinted at long-ago water flows, and the empty horizon that always beckoned them onward. The rovers confirmed what earlier missions had only hinted. Mars was once a wetter world. One of the twin rovers found patches of ground covered in small round pebbles that scientists nicknamed blueberries. These tiny spheres were formed by water soaking through the soil in the ancient past. In another spot, layered bedrock revealed the signature of sediment deposited at the bottom of a long-vanished lake. The evidence was suddenly clear and tangible. Mars had not always been the dry, cold desert we see today. Long ago, liquid water pooled and flowed on its surface. There might have been streams and shallows where gentle waves lapped against red sandy shores. This realization cast Mars in a new light. Perhaps it was once a cradle for life, or could be again in the future. Through all their discoveries, the rovers also showed us what a lonely place Mars is now. They traversed plains where not a single blade of grass grows, climbed hills that have stood barren for millions of years, and waited out dust storms beneath a salmon-coloured sky. Sometimes, from their cameras, we caught sight of dust devils, whirling columns of fine sand, dancing across the distant plains, stirring the quiet air. Aside from the whisper of the wind and those wandering dust devils, nothing moved on Mars except our rovers. In that stillness, each rover carried a piece of human presence into the void. Now and then, they would stop and turn their cameras upward at twilight. On rare, clear evenings, they even managed to capture a tiny, bright speck in the sky. Earth, shining faintly as an evening star from the surface of Mars. Seeing that image was humbling. All of humanity, everything we've ever known, was just a pinpoint of light in the Martian dusk. The rovers endured far beyond anyone's expectations, becoming lonely heroes of exploration. Designed to last only a few months, they kept going for years. One of them, having traversed miles of terrain and having survived multiple harsh winters, eventually succumbed after a record 14 years of operation. In its final months, a massive dust storm engulfed the planet, darkening the skies for weeks. Without sunlight, the rover's batteries drained, and it could no longer wake up. Its last whisper of data to Earth was received just before the Martian night fell over it. Engineers poetically translated its final status as, "My battery is low and it's getting dark." Then, contact was lost. The rover fell silent under the dust-filled sky, coming to rest in the very landscape it had worked so hard to illuminate for us. Another rover had ceased communication years earlier, after valiantly climbing a Martian hill, only to get stuck in deep sand. One by one, our mechanical explorers paused and stayed at their final resting spots on Mars. Now artifacts on a quiet world, like lone monuments to human curiosity. But each ending was also a beginning. As the older rovers fell silent, new ones took their place, carrying forward the torch of discovery. In 2012, a car-sized rover bristling with scientific instruments was gently lowered to the Martian surface by a hovering sky crane, a daring and surreal method of arrival. This rover set out to explore an ancient crater that once held a lake. It found rippled patterns in the dried mudstone, chemical traces of clay and minerals that form in water, and even organic molecules preserved in the rocks. Piece by piece, it painted a picture of a Mars that could have been habitable for microorganisms eons ago. The rover climbed the lower slopes of a mountain at the crater's center, reading the layers of rock as one might read chapters of a history book, each stratum revealing a different epoch of Mars's past. Through its eyes we saw Martian sunsets, the sun going down as a faint, shrunken disk, the sky near it tinted blue by fine dust. We saw new panoramas of alien cliffs and dunes. Mars was still quiet and empty, but our understanding of it was growing richer and deeper with every year. In 2021, yet another rover arrived, this one equipped not only to explore, but also to prepare for the future. Along with it came a tiny helicopter, the first aircraft ever to fly on another world. In the thin Martian air, the little drone spun its rotors furiously and managed to lift off, hovering briefly above the dusty ground. For the first time, a machine flew in the skies of Mars, if only for short hops. A preview, perhaps, of how human ingenuity could one day soar through Martian skies on larger wings. That new rover also carried an instrument to make oxygen from the carbon dioxide atmosphere, generating a few breaths worth of air out of the Martian breeze. It was a small but crucial demonstration, showing that resources on Mars could be turned into something life-sustaining. With each success, each innovation, we were learning not just about Mars as it is, but how we might live there ourselves. By the time all these rovers had traversed the Martian plains and hills, the once fantastical idea of walking on Mars no longer seemed like a distant fantasy. We had maps of safe landing spots, knowledge of where to find water ice underground, and even practice with making air to breathe. The silent landscapes were becoming familiar, their secrets slowly revealed by our tireless mechanical scouts. Mars still stood quiet and patient, but the footprints of humanity were drawing nearer. The long journey from looking up at a red star to actually setting foot on its soil was nearly at its climax. All the while, Mars, with its thin winds and ancient rocks, waited for us to take the next step. And we were almost ready to answer that call. Ever since the first glimmerings of Mars's true nature reached us, the ultimate goal lurking in the background was to go ourselves. The idea of a human colony on Mars had lived in scientists' reports and science fiction novels alike for decades. As each new discovery made Mars more familiar, the call of the red planet grew stronger. By the turn of the 21st century, planning for a Mars expedition, and even a permanent settlement, shifted from the realm of speculation to something concrete. Engineers and dreamers started laying out what such a journey would require. How much food, water, and air would people need for months or years on Mars? Could they grow crops in Martian soil, or extract water from the ice underground? Step by step, the concept of living on Mars was dissected and studied, until it began to feel less like a fantasy and more like an achievable endeavor. For years, these plans remained blueprints and computer simulations. The challenges were immense. The vast distance, the dangerous radiation beyond Earth's protective magnetic field, the thin air and sub-zero cold of Mars's environment. Each problem needed a solution, and one by one, solutions were imagined. Spacecraft designs emerged for huge rockets that could carry humans and all their supplies across interplanetary space. Concepts for habitats were drawn. Some were inflatable domes that could be expanded on the Martian surface. Others were solid modules that could be buried under soil for radiation protection. Life support systems were devised to recycle air and water. Scientists experimented with growing plants under lamps in barren soils that mimicked Martian dirt, learning which nutrients to add and which hardy plants might thrive in a greenhouse on Mars. As knowledge grew, so did public excitement. The notion of becoming a multi-planetary species entered the culture. Space agencies around the world collaborated on roadmaps for sending humans to Mars, setting tentative dates a couple of decades in the future. Private companies joined in, injecting new enthusiasm and ideas. One visionary entrepreneur announced plans to build a fleet of advanced rockets with the explicit goal of ferrying settlers to Mars. He spoke vividly of a Martian city bustling with life in the coming century, complete with homes, schools, and farms under an alien sky. At the same time, a non-profit venture gathered volunteers from the public for a one-way trip to Mars, demonstrating how many ordinary people were willing to leave Earth forever for the chance to build a new world. Thousands signed up, undeterred by the risks and the permanence of such a choice. Clearly, the dream of Mars had spread far beyond scientists and engineers. It had become a shared dream of humanity. By the 2020s, it was no longer a question of if humans would go to Mars, but when. Each passing year brought new tests and milestones. Rockets more powerful than any before were test-fired, lighting up the night sky with hope. Astronauts practiced long-duration missions on the International Space Station, learning how to live in microgravity for the many months a Mars voyage would take. Experimental habitats were set up in Earth's most desolate places: Antarctic ice fields, desert dunes, even volcanic plains, where crews simulated Mars missions for weeks on end. They donned mock spacesuits to venture outside, collected samples, and coped with isolation to prepare for what life on Mars might be like. All these efforts were like rehearsals for an ambitious play, each trying to anticipate what could go wrong and how to endure the hardships of a Martian existence. Finally came the moment when talk turned into action. An international mission was agreed upon, drawing expertise from many countries and organizations. The first crew of Mars settlers was chosen, carefully selected men and women who possessed not only the skills, but the temperament to face years far from home. They trained intensively, learning how to repair every system of their habitat, how to perform medical procedures on one another, how to handle emergencies from fires to equipment failures. They practiced growing vegetables in hydroponic trays and drilling into simulated rock to extract water ice. Each member of the crew understood both the grand importance of their mission and its personal cost. They would be away from Earth for a very long time. Some of them might never return if the colony took root and needed its pioneers to remain. Before departure, they said heartfelt goodbyes to family and friends, not knowing when or if they would hug them again. They packed a few small treasures from home, perhaps a locket with family photos, a favorite book, or letters to read on lonely nights under a foreign sky. It was a bittersweet departure, filled with excitement for the journey ahead and a quiet sadness for the world they were leaving behind. Their spacecraft stood ready at the launch site, a tall, gleaming rocket, the culmination of years of research and dreams. Within it was a compact living quarters for the crew, a lander that would eventually carry them down to Martian soil, and all the supplies to give them a fighting chance at survival on another planet. As dawn broke on launch day, the astronauts boarded the capsule atop the rocket, strapped in side by side, and waited through the final countdown. On the ground, a small crowd of engineers and loved ones watched from a safe distance, while millions more observed through their screens, hearts pounding with anticipation. When the engines ignited, a thunderous glow lit up the early morning. The rocket rose slowly at first, then faster, thundering into the sky on a pillar of flame. To those watching from afar, the bright ascent was nearly silent, just a distant rumble rolling across the plains. Many had tears in their eyes, born of both hope and the gravity of the moment. In that flame and thunder, humanity was leaving the only home it had ever known, to extend its presence to a new world. Within minutes, the spacecraft carrying the crew slipped beyond the blue sky, into the dark expanse of space. The Earth fell away beneath them, growing smaller and more blue against the blackness. The crew pressed their faces to the small windows for one last glimpse of oceans and clouds and the familiar continents of home. Then our planet became a shrinking disk, then just a bright star among many. For the crew, that sight was deeply moving. Earth, their cradle, now just another light in the sky behind them. Ahead, somewhere in that darkness, Mars awaited, a faint reddish spark that would slowly grow day by day. They were truly on their way, embarked on the longest voyage any humans had ever attempted. As days turned to weeks in the void, the pioneers settled into a routine aboard their ship. They maintained their vessel, exercised to keep their bodies strong in weightlessness, and shared stories of why they had each chosen to take this journey. In quiet moments, they floated by the window and gazed at the stars, knowing one of those tiny points of light was their destination. They carried with them the aspirations of countless people back on Earth. Every sunrise and sunset on Earth, people would think of them hurtling onward through the dark, carrying humanity's hope to the red planet. After several months, the date drew near when they would finally arrive at Mars. Back on Earth, mission controllers prepared for the critical steps ahead, entering orbit, descending to the surface, and the challenges of landing on a world where no human had ever stood. The tension and excitement built up quietly as that day approached. In the spacecraft, the crew checked and rechecked their landing craft, making sure everything was ready. They peered out at Mars as it grew from a dot to a rusty sphere filling their window, a world that until now had been seen only by robotic eyes. Humanity stood on the brink of a new chapter. All the centuries of stargazing, all the stories and studies, the prayers to ancient gods, and the equations on modern whiteboards, all of it had led to this moment. The first human footsteps on Mars were just ahead, almost close enough to touch. In the final quiet hours before the descent, the crew members spoke softly to one another and in video messages to Earth. They promised to do their best out there on that silent ground. They knew history was watching, but more importantly, they felt the presence of all those dreamers who came before, those who had looked up at Mars with longing. Now it was their turn to fulfill that longing. And so, with Mars looming below and the sun rising over its horizon, they made ready to land. Everyone listening back on Earth held their breath through that fateful attempt. Down the spacecraft went, through the thin atmosphere, towards the ochre plains that had waited untouched for ages. In that delicate transition, humanity was crossing a threshold. The past and the future were about to meet on the dusty surface of an alien world. What happened next would become a story told for generations. But for now, in this moment, all was focused, calm, and full of quiet hope. Just the gentle voice of mission control guiding the crew, and the nearly soundless descent of the lander through Martian skies. In the pre-dawn hush of launch day, 6 astronauts stand at the base of a towering rocket, each alone with their thoughts as the stars fade against the light of approaching dawn. They move slowly, deliberately, the weight of years of training and the hopes of an entire world on their shoulders. The air is cool and still, carrying the distant roar of ocean waves beyond the space center's horizon. Above them, the rocket gleams under floodlights, a spire of ambition aimed at the pale red beacon of Mars hanging low in the sky. This moment is steeped in both quiet awe and resolve. Humanity is about to take an irreversible step toward the unknown. The crew's breaths mingle in the silence as they exchange glances, a gentle understanding passing among them that from this point on, their lives will never be the same. Each heartbeat echoes loudly in their ears, yet they remain calm, drawing on the camaraderie and confidence built through countless hours of preparation together. 6 astronauts had been chosen for this historic journey, a number deemed ideal to carry the diverse skills and resilience needed for survival on another world. In this final hour on Earth, their individual faces are illuminated by the glow of the launch pad lights, each reflecting a mix of determination and wonder. Commander Elise Morgan stands at the front, her gloved hand briefly touching the side of the rocket, as if in reassurance. A veteran test pilot with grey at her temples and wisdom in her eyes, she has led crews through darkness and void before. Yet even for her, this mission is unlike any other. Years of planning and dreaming distilled into a single column of metal and fuel. She closes her eyes for a moment, recalling the promise she made to herself and to those back home, that no matter what awaits on Mars, she will bring her team as far as humanly possible. Around her, the other crew members wait in respectful quiet, each lost in a private reverie, but united in purpose. Engineer Kenji Watanabe adjusts a strap on his gear and inhales deeply, the scent of machinery and fresh morning dew filling his senses. In his mind, he runs through checklists of the spacecraft's systems, finding calm in the familiar routine of engineering protocols. Kenji's passion for fixing things, from tiny circuit boards to roaring rocket engines, has brought him from a childhood in Osaka, tinkering with radios, all the way to this Martian odyssey. He glances upward at the sleek spacecraft mounted atop the rocket and allows himself a small, proud smile. Every bolt and circuit in that ship has been inspected under his watch. He trusts the vessel with his life, knowing the countless tests and redundancies built into it. A faint hum from the service structure signals that power is flowing, life coursing through the craft's veins. Kenji's fingers itch to be at the controls, but for now, he simply places a hand on the metal hull and silently thanks the engineers around the world who made this dream machine a reality. Beside him, Dr. Anaya Rahim, the mission's medical officer and biologist, holds a small family photo against her chest for a final moment before tucking it safely into her personal pocket. She is acutely aware that it may be years before she sees her loved ones again, years of distance that will stretch not just across miles, but across the void of space. Anaya's dark eyes glisten with emotion in the dim light, but her expression is gentle and steady. She has spent a lifetime studying how the human body copes with extreme environments, from high-altitude clinics in the Himalayas to months-long Antarctic winter rovers. Now she will tend to the health of this crew on the ultimate voyage, monitoring their bodies in microgravity and their minds in isolation. She mentally reviews the countermeasures prepared, the nutrition plans, exercise regimes, and medical supplies compressed into their habitat. Her heart quickens slightly as she recalls a fact from training, that after 6 to 8 months coasting through space, her crewmates might arrive on Mars, weakened by weightlessness. It will be her duty to keep them fit, calm, and ready to work the moment they touch Martian soil. Anaya breathes out slowly, releasing her worries into the cool air. In this quiet, pre-launch moment, she lets faith replace fear, trusting in her team's strength and her own skill to guide them through whatever is to come. Geologist Marco Diaz shifts his feet on the concrete pad, feeling the solid earth beneath and savouring the sensation. He quietly scoops a bit of earth with a gloved hand, a ritual of connection to the planet he's leaving behind. Marco has devoted his life to studying rocks and landscapes, reading the story of Earth's past in ancient stones. Now he stands ready to read the tales of a distant world written in red Martian dust. He imagines the terrain that awaits him, rust-coloured hills, sprawling deserts of fine sand, and jagged craters that have stood silent for eons. In his mind's eye, he already sees himself traversing the Martian surface in his heavy suit, boots crunching into soil that has never known a human footprint. As the first person to study Martian geology up close, Marco yearns to unravel the mysteries of Mars's history. Was it ever home to water or life? What secrets lie in those strata of rock? The prospect sends a thrill through him, tempering the sadness of leaving his home planet. Clenching the bit of soil in his hand one last time, he lets it fall back to the ground. His voice is barely above a whisper as he says farewell to Earth in Spanish, a quiet prayer for safe travels and discovery. Standing a short distance apart from the others, pilot Viktor Demyanov tilts his head up at the mighty rocket, his breath fogging lightly in the cool air. As a child in rural Siberia, Viktor grew up under wide night skies filled with stars, dreaming of adventure beyond the horizon. Those dreams carried him through a career as a fighter pilot and then an astronaut, earning him a reputation for steady nerves, even in the most daunting situations. Now, on the cusp of humanity's greatest journey, he feels the familiar flutter of adrenaline. Victor's hand rests on the helmet at his side as he recalls the countless simulations he has flown for this mission. He can almost feel the vibration of the engines and hear the thunderous roar that will engulf them at liftoff. It's his job to guide this rocket out of Earth's cradle, through the atmosphere and into orbit, and he carries that responsibility with quiet pride. Though Commander Morgan will make the calls, Victor will be at the controls, executing the finely choreographed dance of ascent. In these final minutes, he whispers a line from a Russian cosmonaut's poem he once learned, something about Earth below and stars above, a reminder of the thin line between our world and the endless cosmos. He smiles softly, knowing the next time he looks up at the sky, he'll be on the other side of that line. Astrobiologist Una Kim closes her eyes briefly and inhales the scent of the sea breeze wafting from beyond the launch complex. It carries the salt of Earth's oceans, a sensory memory she hopes to recall on the dry plains of Mars. Una's specialty is searching for signs of life in extreme environments. She has chased microbes in volcanic lakes and traced fossils in desert badlands, all in preparation for the day she might find evidence that Mars once harbored life. Among the crew, she is the dreamer who stares at the stars a little longer, wondering who or what might have once looked back. In her pocket, she carries a small sample vial, empty and waiting to be filled with Martian soil. That tiny container embodies her scientific hopes. If life ever sparkled even briefly in Mars's ancient lakes, or beneath its icy soil, she is determined to find its traces. Una knows the odds and the history. No conclusive signs of life have been found on Mars so far. Still, the possibility sends her spirit soaring. As she listens to the gentle rhythms of the night, she silently vows to be attentive to every clue Mars offers, however subtle. Perhaps, she muses, the greatest discoveries await in places we least expect, on a silent planet where only the wind now whispers. The crew members gather together as a launch technician signals it is time to proceed. They form a line and begin the walk toward the elevator that will carry them up the rocket's flank to the crew capsule. Each step is deliberate, echoing softly across the concrete, as if they tread between two worlds with every footfall. High above, the sky has lightened to a deep blue, and the last stars blink out, yielding to the rising sun. The launch pad is alive with flickering lights and the distant figures of engineers making final checks. A gentle voice in their earpieces gives a go-ahead from mission control, confirming that all systems are nominal and the weather is clear for launch. It is a carefully chosen day, one that mission planners pinpointed years in advance to align Earth and Mars at their closest approach. Windows for a voyage to Mars open only roughly every 2 years, when the planets line up just right for the long journey. This day's alignment is perfect, and the moment has finally come. They pause at the base of the service tower as the sun's first rays spill over the horizon, painting the rocket's white body with a golden glow. For a brief moment, none of them speak. Words feel inadequate to capture the gravity and grace of this dawn. Instead, Commander Morgan turns to her crew and meets each of their eyes in turn. In that shared glance, years of training, sacrifice, and trust are affirmed. There is a quiet understanding that they are ready, not just as individuals, but together, as a family forged by this mission. Anaya offers a warm, encouraging grin. Victor gives a brisk nod and pats the commander on the shoulder. Kenji flashes a thumbs up. Marco and Una exchange excited, determined smiles. It is a small moment of humanity at the foot of an immense endeavour, a spark of camaraderie amid towering metal and engineering. One by one, they step into the elevator that ascends alongside the rocket. As the platform rises slowly, the landscape of the Space Center spreads out below them. The intricate lattice of the launch structure, the green stretches of marshland beyond, and the distant glint of the ocean where morning light dances on waves. Birds stir in the wetlands, unaware that 6 humans are about to depart their world. Inside the elevator, the crew remains quiet. Some close their eyes, offering final silent prayers or reflections. Others gaze outward, committing the sight of home to memory. Up and up they go, 30, 50, 100 meters, until they are level with the capsule that will be their home between worlds. At the top, a hatch opens to a narrow access arm leading to the spacecraft. The astronauts shuffle carefully across this bridge, each footstep measured. Beneath them, there is nothing but air, and far below, the solid ground they will soon leave behind. The spacecraft's hatch is open and inviting, illuminated from within by soft white lights. Commander Morgan is the first to duck inside, moving with practiced ease in her suit. One by one, the crew follows. The capsule interior is compact and familiar. They've spent countless hours in an identical simulator, down to every switch and display. Yet knowing this time is real sends a subtle shiver through each of them. They strap themselves into their seats, a snug embrace that holds them in place for the violent ride to come. Inside her helmet, Elise hears the calm voice of launch control. "Commander, report when ready for seal." She pulls the hatch shut with a firm clank and locks it, sealing the crew inside. "Habitat module secure. We are ready," she replies, her voice steady and clear. The others begin their suit leak checks, confirming that their life support systems are green. Kenji's fingers dance over the control panel, verifying that power flows to all systems. Victor brings up the flight trajectory display, already plotting the ascent in his mind. The hum of pumps and airflow is the only background sound now, a soft mechanical heartbeat surrounding them. As ground technicians withdraw the access arm and clear the pad, the crew finds themselves alone atop the fully fueled rocket. A serene quiet fills the capsule, broken only by the occasional crackle of radio updates. Commander Morgan takes a moment to reflect on the mission ahead as the countdown clocks tick beneath her feet. Their objectives echo in her mind: to journey across 300 million kilometers of space, to land safely on Mars, and to establish the first human foothold on that alien world. They carry with them a prefabricated habitat, scientific equipment, and the sum of humanity's hopes for extending life beyond Earth. This is not just an exploration mission for a few days. It is a bid to begin a permanent presence, a small colony on Mars that could one day grow. The crew will be on their own, tens of millions of miles from the nearest help. Every action must be careful, every challenge faced with ingenuity and composure. Elise breathes in, feeling the cool oxygen from her suit flow over her face. She knows unknown trials lie ahead on Mars, unanticipated problems and risks they will meet far from home. Yet in this moment, suspended above Earth with dawn light streaming through the capsule window, she feels a profound peace. They are as ready as anyone can be. Through the window, a sliver of the sun crests the Earth's curve, flooding the sky with pink and gold. Victor murmurs an old proverb to himself, something about journeys and single steps. In mission control, a voice begins the polling of go, no-go for launch. Each system responds in the affirmative. Over the radio, the crew hears the flight director. "All stations report go for launch." The words send a ripple of anticipation through their veins. Anaya's heart rate quickens. She notes it on her biomonitor, but also notes the steadying breath she takes to calm herself. Marco flexes his hands, imagining the Martian rocks he will touch. Yuna blinks back a tear as she thinks of the pale blue dot they are about to leave behind. Kenji rechecks the engine indicators, whispering under his breath to the engines as if they were old friends. "Take us there safe." Elise tightens her grip on the chair's armrests, a gentle smile on her lips. In the quiet of their sealed cabin, in the final minutes before ignition, these 6 souls share a single feeling: gratitude. They are grateful for the chance to be here, for the trust placed in them, and for the remarkable journey that is about to begin. The final minute counts down, and the deep rumble of the rocket coming alive replaces the silence. As the vibration builds, Commander Morgan's voice comes through on the crew loop, gentle and firm. "This is it, team. Eyes open, stay sharp. We carry the dreams of so many. Let's go make history." A chorus of affirmations greets her in return. There is no fear now, only focus and a sense of unity. Each crew member performs their last checks, confirming they are strapped in and ready for the immense forces about to be unleashed. They have trained for every scenario: engine failures, pad aborts, emergency escapes, but they push those thoughts aside and trust the rocket and themselves. With 20 seconds to go, the automatic sequence engages. The rocket's guidance system aligns to the precise launch azimuth that will arc them into Earth orbit. Pumps are at full pressure, valves open, and the fuel flows. Outside, at the pad's perimeter, cameras fix their gaze on the slender vehicle as it prepares to leap. In distant cities and villages around the world, people tune in to broadcasts of this moment, hearts collectively pounding in solidarity with the 6 travelers. Parents hold children a little tighter as they watch, and old stargazers shed quiet tears of joy. Humanity is gathered, in spirit, on this very morning, looking up. The Mars-bound crew is not leaving Earth alone. They carry the spirit of everyone who dares to dream beyond our sky. Finally, the moment arrives. Ignition. A flash of light and billowing cloud envelops the pad base as the engines roar to life. The spacecraft shudders, every bolt straining, as a controlled fury of thrust builds beneath them. 10, 9, 8. The countdown resonates in their ears even as the vibration rattles their bones. Victor's hand hovers near the controls, ready to take over if needed, but the automated system is doing its job. 7, 6, 5. Inside the cabin, the noise is a muffled thunder. They feel more than hear the engines. Elise closes her eyes just for a heartbeat, savouring the last instant before departure. She pictures Earth as a whole, vibrant, blue, alive, and whispers a silent goodbye. 4, 3, 2, 1. With a lurch, the clamps holding the rocket down release. The mighty vehicle surges upward, slowly at first, then with rapidly increasing speed. A chorus of astonished cries and cheers rises from the observation areas far below, but inside the spacecraft, the crew is pressed back into their seats as gravity's grip fights to keep them earthbound. Elise keeps her gaze forward, voice calm as she calls out, "Liftoff! We have liftoff!" Her words are carried on a shaky radio signal to mission control, where applause breaks out even as they maintain disciplined focus on the telemetry. The rocket climbs, a brilliant spear of flame cutting through the morning sky. Daylight washes over the scene, and for a moment the craft is seen by those on the ground as a star ascending, trailing a pillar of white cloud that casts an ethereal shadow across the ground. Martian dawn breaks with a pale golden light, softly unveiling a landscape no human had ever seen in person until now. Less than a day ago, the crew's lander touched down here in a swirl of red dust, and the memory of that historic landing still reverberates in their minds. Now, as their first full morning on Mars begins, they step outside onto the powdery soil, their boots imprinting the ground with human footprints for the very first time. The air is deathly thin and cold. the horizon vast and strange, but their hearts swell with excitement and resolve. This silent, rust-coloured world will be their home, and they are determined to make it a habitable one. Their first priority is power. Soon after touchdown, they begin deploying large solar arrays folded against the lander, anchoring them into the rusty soil. Each panel unfurls slowly, reflective surfaces catching the pale sunlight that will power their life support and communication systems. The crew works methodically in the low Martian gravity, securing support struts and checking connections. Through their helmet visors, they watch as the habitat's monitors flicker to life, drawing energy from Mars's sun for the very first time. Working in bulky white EVA suits, the astronauts move deliberately, mindful of every step on this unfamiliar ground. Each tool and component they handle feels clumsy through thick gloves. Yet Mars's lower gravity makes the heavy panels and struts oddly light. Reddish dust kicks up with their efforts and clings to their boots and visors. Beyond the immediate bustle of their work, the world is eerily still. There are no sounds except the muffled hiss of their suit respirators and the faint radio chatter between crewmates. From time to time they pause, gazing out at the alien horizon, a stark expanse of red deserts and distant hills, before refocusing on the task at hand. In this quiet dawn labour, they are true pioneers, both humbled and exhilarated by the magnitude of their undertaking. With auxiliary power flowing, the next step is to assemble their habitat. The crew's living module, a 2-level cylindrical shelter about 7.5 meters across, has survived the descent intact. Nearby sits a pre-delivered laboratory module, identical in design, waiting to be activated. Working slowly and deliberately, they maneuver the lab module closer to the habitat core and link the two with a pressurized connector. When the seals engage and the modules join, their combined interior offers about 960 square feet of space, a tiny, self-contained world in which 6 humans must eat, sleep, and survive for over a year. Connecting the 2 habitat modules is a delicate operation. The laboratory module had landed a short distance away on its own automated platform, and now the crew must maneuver it into place. Using a remote-controlled rover as a tug, they slowly drag the cylindrical lab across the uneven ground toward the main habitat. 2 astronauts walk alongside, guiding its alignment. The process is slow and tense. Finally, with careful precision, they dock the lab's hatch to the habitat's side airlock, sealing the connection. Inside the habitat, a circular hatchway now opens into the new lab space, effectively doubling their living and working area. The moment the modules join, the crew exchanges celebratory smiles through their visors. Their outpost has grown from one small capsule to a 2-part home, a sign of tangible progress on this empty planet. Once the habitat and lab are connected, the crew routes power through cables and switches on the life support systems. Air pumps begin to hum, circulating the first breathable atmosphere inside their new home. Heating units push back the bitter cold that seeps in from the Martian night, raising the interior to shirt-sleeve temperatures. One by one, critical systems are brought online and checked. Oxygen generators, carbon dioxide scrubbers, water recyclers, all must function perfectly in this unforgiving environment. After hours of setup, an indicator finally glows green. The habitat is pressurized and stable. In a quiet, momentous ritual, the explorers enter and carefully remove their helmets, sharing the first breath of artificially made Martian air. It smells faintly of metal and recycled plastic, but to them it is the sweetest breath of their lives. Over the next few days, the crew ferries equipment and supplies into the connected modules, slowly turning the empty shells into a livable station. They bolt down sleeping cots, set up a small galley for preparing meals, and organize the laboratory benches and research tools. Personal mementos are taped to the walls, photographs of loved ones, a mission patch, a small flag, tokens of Earth in an otherwise stark habitat. Every item finds its place, as efficient use of space is essential. When they finish, the interior is cramped but orderly, with cables snaking along walls and storage lockers packed tight. It is not spacious by any means, but after the long journey through space, the crew finally has a place on Mars to call home. Gradually, the sterile metal cylinder begins to feel a little more human. Each crew member stakes out a tiny personal berth along the walls, a sleeping bunk curtained off for a modicum of privacy, where they tuck away photos of family, drawings from children, or a favourite paperback saved for lonely nights. The habitat's air takes on a subtle mix of odours: machine oil, warmed electronics, dried food packets, and the undeniable hint of human presence. The constant background hum of pumps and fans becomes the colony's soundtrack, lulling them to sleep and greeting them each morning. Within these walls, they begin to develop daily routines that almost feel normal. This assemblage of metal, plastic, and fabric is now home, a fragile, cozy bubble of Earth on an alien planet. That first night in the habitat, the crew shares a simple meal under the soft glow of LED lights. Rehydrated packets of food have never tasted so good. Every bite is seasoned with the satisfaction of a day's hard-won progress. They sit together around a small fold-out table, voices low and filled with exhaustion and wonder. Through a tiny porthole, one of them points out a bright star twinkling in the alien sky. It is Earth, hanging low over the Martian horizon, a pale blue dot now reduced to a distant memory of home. In that moment, they feel both triumph and loneliness. Pioneers who have built the first human foothold on Mars, and strangers under an alien sky far from everything they once knew. In the weeks that follow the initial build, a daily routine takes shape in the ghost colony's new home. Each morning begins at mission dawn, when weak sunlight filters through the habitat's window, and the whir of life support fans provides a gentle wake-up hum. The crew rises from their bunks and gathers for a quick breakfast, steaming cups of rehydrated coffee or tea and small portions of packaged cereal. They speak quietly, voices subdued by the vast silence outside their walls. Every day on Mars, each sol is about 40 minutes longer than an Earth day, and the team gradually adjusts to this subtle shift, letting their sleep cycles drift to match the Martian rhythm. Outside, the temperature is far below freezing each night, and the air unbreathable. But inside, the habitat remains a warm, pressurized bubble of safety, a little oasis of Earth amid the Martian desert. After breakfast, the crew divides up the day's duties according to a carefully planned schedule. Some tasks are done daily without fail: inspecting the habitat's systems, cleaning dust from air filters, and uploading any new instructions or messages from Earth, always delayed by many minutes due to the distance. Other tasks vary by the sol, perhaps an extravehicular activity, EVA, to service equipment, a geology survey around the landing site, or hours spent in the lab analysing soil and rock samples. The mission commander reviews the day's plans and coordinates with mission control via one-way updates, while the engineer checks the solar array output and battery levels. Meanwhile, the science specialists tend to the greenhouse experiments or calibrate instruments for monitoring Mars's thin atmosphere. Every person has a role, and in the confined world of the outpost, each role is crucial. The success of one day's routine flows into the next, building a rhythm that helps anchor the crew's morale in an environment where time can otherwise feel boundless and disorienting. To counter the low gravity's effects on their bodies, exercise becomes a mandatory part of the daily schedule. In one corner of the habitat, they have set up a treadmill and a stationary bicycle rigged to generate power. Each crew member spends at least an hour a day working up a sweat, their heartbeats thudding loudly in their ears inside the cramped exercise area. The reduced gravity makes running feel different, easier on the joints, yet oddly tiring in its own way. And they know muscle and bone loss is a serious concern if they remain idle. As they jog or pedal, they sometimes take turns peering out a small window by the equipment, gazing at the barren landscape to remind themselves why they are here. Red dunes and jagged rocks lie just beyond, motionless under the pinkish sky, while the gentle vibration of the treadmill underfoot affirms that human life is moving forward on this still and silent world. Life on Mars is not all carefully scripted routine. Unexpected problems arise that test the crew's ingenuity. One afternoon, an alarm sounds in the habitat. A sensor detects a drop in air pressure. The crew responds swiftly, tracing it to a minor leak in the airlock door seal. Working together in their pressurized suits and emergency oxygen masks, they repair the seal using spare gaskets and tools on hand, grateful that this surprise was a manageable issue. On another occasion, one of the habitat's appliances, a water recycling pump, malfunctions and spews precious fluid onto the floor. The astronauts scramble to contain the spill, mopping up and patching the system, acutely aware that every drop of water is life. There are also persistent technical nuisances. A hydrogen fuel cell meant for backup power never works quite right despite the engineer's repeated tinkering. Each such challenge is a lesson in self-reliance. With no possibility of outside help in real time, the crew must rely on their own wits and creativity to fix problems using only the materials at hand. Mars itself occasionally reminds them that it is a restless planet. Late one night, as the crew sleeps, a subtle tremor shudders through the ground. The habitat's structure rattles gently. A few small items on a shelf clink together, and a wall panel creaks. It is a Marsquake, likely caused by the slow cooling and contracting of the planet's crust. The astronauts jolt awake in alarm, hearts pounding in the brief confusion of being shaken on a world that is usually silent and still. The quake is minor, and nothing is damaged, but it still sets everyone on edge. In the morning, they discuss it with a mix of nervous jokes and scientific curiosity, logging the time and magnitude from their instruments. It is yet another reminder that Mars has its own rhythms and surprises, and that even the ground beneath their feet cannot be taken for granted. As the sols pass, the crew learns to live not just on Mars, but with each other. Inside a habitat no larger than a modest apartment, privacy is scarce, and personalities inevitably rub together. Minor habits, a crewmate's humming during work, or another's method of meticulously arranging tools, can spark irritation in the cramped quarters. They handle these moments with patience and humour, understanding that cooperation is their strongest survival tool. One astronaut half jokes in her journal that moving into the hab is like suddenly having 5 spouses. You quickly discover everyone's quirks and learn to adapt. There is no option to walk away after an argument on a planet where stepping outside without a suit is deadly, so conflicts must be resolved through communication and empathy. Over time, the group develops an unspoken language of gentle gestures and routines that help smooth over friction before it can flare. In their isolation, they become more than a team, a family forged by necessity in a world with no other human life. Each crew member found personal ways to cope with the isolation. The mission commander often writes detailed log entries late at night, documenting not just the day's events, but her private thoughts, as if composing a chronicle for future explorers. The pilot engineer tinkers endlessly with equipment, updating rover software, tightening bolts, inventing small improvements to their life support systems, finding comfort in solving tangible problems. The science officer spends free moments cataloguing rock specimens and gazing at photographs of Earth's landscapes taped above his bunk, imagining how the Martian hills might have looked with rivers and forests long ago. The medical officer, in quieter times, plays a favourite classical music piece on a handheld device, softly filling the hab with piano notes or violin melodies that remind everyone of home. Or sometimes she simply sits by the window and lets the distant starlight calm her thoughts. Each of them, in their own way, grapples with the distance and loneliness. But these private rituals also weave together a resilient web of support. When one person feels down or homesick, the others respond with encouragement or a bit of humour. In those moments, the crew truly becomes a family, holding one another up on a world far away from everyone else. Indeed, over time, the crew begins to form their own small traditions to keep spirits high. On one evening, they mark the passing of 50 souls on Mars with a family dinner, pooling a few special treats from their personal stash to share. They even improvise a birthday celebration for the mission commander, fashioning a tiny cupcake from a protein bar and pretending to blow out a candle. In the cramped hub of their habitat, under makeshift decorations drawn on spare packing material, they feel a warmth and camaraderie that momentarily erases the countless miles between them and Earth. It is in these gentle moments of laughter and togetherness that they remember why they embarked on this journey, for each other, for humanity, and for the sheer wonder of living on another world. In quieter moments, the crew sometimes gathers at the habitat's small viewport to gaze at the Martian sky. The panorama of stars is breathtaking. Unhindered by clouds or light pollution, the Milky Way spills across the darkness in a sparkling river. Mars's 2 tiny moons make their own timid appearances. Phobos, the closer moon, races overhead swiftly, crossing the sky in just a few hours, while distant Deimos drifts along more leisurely. Occasionally, Phobos even passes in front of the sun during the day, a swift partial eclipse that casts an odd, fleeting shadow over the outpost. Under the night sky, familiar constellations appear strikingly crisp, though tilted from the orientation the crew knew on Earth. And of course, Earth itself, a bright bluish evening star, glints near the horizon when the timing is right. The sight of their home planet as a tiny beacon evokes both longing and comfort. These stargazing sessions are both humbling and heartening. The crew points out planets and patterns in the sky, sharing stories and memories under alien stars. In those moments, they feel a kinship with all explorers who ever looked up at unknown skies, and it binds them closer together. Communication with Earth is both a lifeline and a frustration. Every message they send takes between 10 and 20 minutes to reach Earth, and any reply takes just as long to come back. Real-time conversation is impossible. Instead, they record daily status reports and questions, bundling them into scheduled uplinks to mission control. In turn, the crew receives batches of communications from Earth, technical guidance from mission planners, scientific feedback on their latest findings, and occasionally the most treasured messages of all, personal notes from family and friends. In the evenings, they gather around a tablet screen to watch video greetings or read emails from home. There is laughter when someone's child holds up a new crayon drawing to the camera, and quiet tears when a spouse's familiar voice speaks from across millions of miles. These distant voices bridge the void between worlds, reminding the crew that though they are far away and few in number, they are not alone in spirit. Still, the time lag is a constant reminder of their remoteness. If a serious emergency occurred, the crew could not expect immediate guidance. A cry for help would vanish into the ether, with no answer for long, critical minutes. Houston, we have a problem, has a very different meaning on Mars. This stark truth reinforces their self-sufficiency, even as it makes each simple hello from Earth an occasion to cherish all the more. During one period, the crew experiences a complete communications blackout when the Sun moves directly between Mars and Earth, an event called solar conjunction. For over 2 weeks, no messages can be exchanged at all. In that silence, the astronauts truly feel the depth of their isolation. They carry on with their duties entirely on their own, following pre-planned schedules and trusting their training. When the Sun finally shifts and a burst of delayed emails and voices from Earth comes through again, the relief is palpable. The long radio silence has tested their autonomy, and they emerge from it more confident than ever in their ability to function as a self-reliant team on Mars. For many weeks, life on Mars finds a steady cadence. The crew grows more confident in operating their habitat and exploring their immediate surroundings. The monotony of routine and the vast, unchanging desert sometimes make the days blur together. But there is comfort in that stability. They have adapted to the rhythms of Martian life. But this fragile sense of equilibrium is about to be tested by the planet itself. In the distance, Mars is brewing something on a global scale, a reminder that this is a world of immense and unpredictable forces. It starts subtly. The crew notices daylight growing dimmer than usual. The sky, usually a butterscotch hue, taking on a brassy brown tint. Each day, the sun's warmth feels a bit weaker on their suits during outdoor tasks, and the horizon becomes gauzy, as if veiled by haze. A regional dust storm has been developing hundreds of kilometers away, and it is growing rapidly. Fine reddish grit begins to coat every exterior surface, accumulating on the solar panels and clinging to visors and instruments. At first, it's a nuisance, requiring extra cleaning. Soon, it becomes clear that something much larger is approaching. The storm is no longer regional, but expanding to blanket much of the planet. The wind begins to moan across the plains, a ghostly whisper heard through the habitat walls at night. Day by day, the sun's disk fades to a feeble amber glow. Soon, a perpetual twilight reigns even at noon, an eerie, rust-coloured gloom that muddles the crew's sense of time. The dust storm has ballooned into a monstrous tempest, engulfing regions far beyond their horizon. What began as a distant haze is now a churning wall of dust overhead, blotting out the sky entirely. The astronauts seal themselves in the habitat, venturing outside only when absolutely necessary and always in pairs for safety. Through the reinforced windows, they watch gusts of fine sand skitter over the ground, erasing footprints and half-burying equipment in drifts. The telemetry outside shows wind speeds of dozens of meters per second, but in Mars's thin air, the gusts feel more insidious than violent, unlikely to topple their habitat, but capable of scouring and infiltrating every exposed crevice. Filters clog with dust, door seals must be continually checked, and the crew fights a constant battle to keep the gritty red powder from invading their fragile oasis. The storm also brings strange electrical phenomena. The crew occasionally notices faint glows of St. Elmo's fire dancing on the tips of metal antennas and railings outside. Ghostly blue coronas caused by static electricity building up in the charged, dust-filled air. At times, a crackling discharge will arc to the ground, momentarily lighting up the gloom. These brief sparks startle the astronauts and interfere with their radio reception, adding an eerie flicker of light to the endless twilight. Mars's tempest has truly become an electric storm, alive with unseen energy. Inside, the crew switches the habitat to low power mode as the storm worsens. The solar panels, once supplying ample energy, are now choked with dust and shrouded in darkness. Their output has dropped to a mere trickle. By day 3 of the storm, the outpost is relying almost entirely on stored battery power. Lights are dimmed to a faint glow, and all non-essential systems lie dormant. The greenhouse's lamps stay off, leaving the fragile plants in chilly darkness. Heating is lowered to conserve energy, so the crew layers their clothing and even wears parts of their EVA suits indoors to stay warm. Huddled in the dimness, they speak in hushed tones over the muted hum of the life support, acknowledging the gravity of their situation. They remember NASA's solar-powered rover Opportunity, which fell silent after a giant dust storm robbed it of sunlight. Now they feel a poignant kinship with that machine's plight. Each passing soul of darkness forces them to carefully tally their remaining power and supplies. In their logbooks, they draft contingency plans, how to further ration electricity and water if the storm lasts weeks, how to stretch their food if resupply is delayed. This is a slow-motion emergency, not a sudden catastrophe, but a gradual smothering of light and power that tests their endurance and resolve. The endless murk and confinement wear on their minds. With the sun gone and the normal cycle of day and night obliterated, some crew members find their sleep drifting into odd patterns. The moan of wind outside, a constant background presence, makes the nights uneasy and filled with strange dreams. Cut off from fresh air and natural light, their world has shrunk to the dim interior of the habitat. Conversations grow quieter as each person occasionally retreats into their own thoughts. They all fight a creeping sense of claustrophobia and worry. The usual diversions, a favourite book read by headlamp, a quick card game at the galley table, feel less satisfying as the storm stretches on. The isolation that was always present now feels absolute. Though they can still send and receive messages to Earth, during the worst of the storm, the crew conserves power and limits communications, which only heightens the sense of solitude. Every task seems to take more effort under the mental fog of uncertainty. Yet through it all, they cling to their routine and to one another. They hold on to small rituals, a brief morning meeting to discuss plans, a shared joke over a meagre dinner. Gentle reminders that the dust will eventually settle. In the heart of the tempest, these rituals and moments of camaraderie glow like candles against the darkness, preserving hope until the first hint of light returns. To keep their spirits up during the storm's long imprisonment, the crew turns to simple comforts. One evening, they all gather in the common area and take turns reading aloud from a well-worn novel that one astronaut brought. The familiar words from Earth bringing comfort as the wind batters the walls outside. Another night, they improvise a game of charades in their dimly lit habitat, resulting in peals of laughter that momentarily drown out the gale. They also cycle through their favourite movies and music stored on laptops, creating a tiny oasis of normalcy amid the chaos. In these ways, hunkered under the ceaseless battering of dust, they remind each other that there is still joy and culture and humanity in their isolated world. Those small moments of levity, a shared laugh, a poignant line from a book, a favourite song hummed softly in unison, become lifelines of sanity that help carry them through the endless Martian night. After 2 weeks, the storm finally begins to wane. One morning, The crew notices a faint glow strengthening in the eastern sky. Daylight, true daylight, is returning, feeble at first, but undeniable. As the airborne dust gradually thins, the oppressive gloom lifts. Patches of the butterscotch Martian sky emerge, and the sun, which had been a ghostly ember, grows brighter with each passing day. The storm's end comes not in a sudden burst of blue sky, but like a slow dawn after a long night. With every increment of light, the solar panels produce a bit more power, and the habitat steadily returns to normal operation. At last, the crew steps outside to survey the aftermath. Martian dust lies thick on everything, reshaping the terrain into fresh drifts and dunes that hadn't existed before. Equipment left outside is half buried. The once gleaming solar arrays are blanketed in red-brown powder. It is a ghostly scene, as if the outpost were abandoned for years and reclaimed by the desert. But the sight of new boot prints being pressed into the powder tells another story. Humanity is still here. One by one, the explorers shake off the lethargy of the long storm and get to work restoring their foothold. They brush the dust from the solar panels, coaxing them back toward full capacity. Buried tools and instruments are dug out and cleaned. Inside, air filters are swapped for fresh ones, and every system is carefully rechecked. Bit by bit, they bring their base back to life under the revitalized Martian sun, determined never to let the red planet's fury extinguish their presence. With the crisis over, the crew turns attention back to the fundamentals of survival. The dust storm's long darkness was hard not only on them, but also on the small crops struggling to grow in their care. When they check the greenhouse module, they find yellowed leaves and wilted stems on many of the experimental plants. Deprived of light for days, and kept only barely alive by minimal power and sparse watering, some of the vegetables did not survive. The crew expected this loss and saved seeds for replanting. Still, it is disheartening to see weeks of careful cultivation damaged in a matter of days. Undeterred, the mission's botanist carefully prunes away the dead foliage and prepares to start anew, determined to coax life from Martian soil once again. Even before the storm, cultivating food on Mars was an uphill battle. Martian regolith is laced with toxic perchlorate salts that stifle plant growth and are hazardous to humans. The crew cannot simply plant seeds in the native red dirt and expect them to thrive. Instead, they dedicate part of the lab module as a small farm, using trays filled with Martian soil that has been painstakingly leached of its toxins and enriched with nutrient-rich earth compost. They also introduce hardy microbes from Earth to help condition the alien soil. Chief among these are cyanobacteria, green-blue bacteria that can survive on Mars's carbon dioxide and minerals, producing oxygen and fixing nitrogen into the soil. By first cultivating these tiny pioneers in the regolith, the crew slowly begins turning sterile Martian dust into a medium where life can take root. Only after the soil is pre-treated and shows signs of healthy microbial activity do they carefully press a few precious seeds into it, hopeful that green sprouts will follow. Their efforts yield results slowly. Tiny green shoots finally break through the soil after many sols of careful tending, and the crew greets them with cheers and incredulous grins. Under the glow of pink grow lights, the first fragile leaves unfurl, tender lettuce greens and plucky radish tops, alive and growing on Mars. The psychological boost of seeing fresh life cannot be overstated. Here, in a barren world, they have nurtured something green and hopeful. It is a small victory, but a pivotal one. After several more weeks of patience, the crew enjoys a tiny first harvest. a handful of leafy greens, and a few radishes. It is no banquet, but each member savours the rare crunch and wetness of these homegrown bites. After so long on rehydrated meals and powdered rations, the taste of something freshly picked is utterly exquisite. The fresh vitamins and crisp texture seem to rejuvenate them. In that humble Martian salad shared together, the gulf between Earth and Mars feels a little smaller. They have literally brought a piece of living Earth into their diets on the red planet. Buoyed by their initial gardening success, the crew grows more ambitious with their food experiments. They dedicate part of the lab to a rotating selection of crops, testing hardy dwarf wheat in one tray, fast-growing herbs and salad greens in another. Under the steady glow of the habitat lights, little green tendrils of peas and even a few tomato seedlings push up through the soil mix. Not everything flourishes. A batch of beans succumbs to a fungal blight in the moist soil, and the tomato vines grow spindly and pale in the low gravity. But every failure is a lesson for future missions, and the successes, however small, kindle excitement. One afternoon, they managed to harvest enough wheat grain to mill a few handfuls of flour. In a makeshift oven, cobbled together from spare parts, the crew bakes a simple flatbread from their own Martian-grown grain. The aroma of fresh bread, something they hadn't smelled in many months, wafts through the habitat, making everyone's mouth water. They split the warm, uneven loaf 5 ways, saving a piece for the 6th member on duty outside, and savour it down to the last crumb. It tastes a little charred and rough, but to them, it is magnificent. True Martian bread, baked by human hands on another world. Moments like these turn mere survival into cherished memory, nourishing not just their bodies, but their optimism and spirit. Water is just as vital to their survival, and the habitat's recycling system can reclaim over 90% of the moisture they use. Exhaled breath and sweat are captured by dehumidifiers, accumulating as droplets in cool collection traps. Most importantly, an advanced processor purifies wastewater and even urine into clean drinking water. Technology carried over from Earth's space stations, now turned to new purpose on Mars. The crew often jokes that yesterday's coffee becomes tomorrow's coffee, but it's essentially true. Thanks to these systems, the colony squeezes every drop of water through multiple cycles. Still, some losses are inevitable. A little vapour vented to the airlock here, a bit of water bound up in experiments or EVA suits there. Over time, even small losses would add up and slowly dwindle their reserves. For long-term survival, they know they must become inventive and draw water from their surroundings. Mars itself holds water, if one knows where to look. The crew knows from orbital scans that subsurface ice lies in this region. On a clear day after the storm, 2 members trek to a low patch of ground not far from the base, where instruments suggest moisture may be locked in the soil. They spread a clear plastic sheet over the area and seal the edges with rocks, creating a crude greenhouse tent. Under the afternoon sun, the ground beneath heats up. Any hidden ice in the regolith sublimates into vapour, which then condenses as droplets on the inside of the tent's canopy. After several hours, the crew carefully collects the accumulated droplets into a container. The yield is small, only a few hundred millilitres on the first attempt, but it is proof that Martian water can indeed be harvested. In the following sols, they repeat this process whenever conditions allow, gradually refining their technique. Each attempt yields a little more than the last. Every precious cup of water they coax from the Martian soil is a cup that didn't have to be hauled from Earth. This modest supplemental supply bolsters their reserves and provides a profound psychological boost. The crew feels a growing sense of self-reliance. They are truly beginning to live off the land of Mars, drawing what they need from the planet's dust and ice. Mars remains as harsh as ever, but bit by bit, it is relinquishing some of its resources to its new human guests. Month after month, the crew's reports home grow routine and reassuring. They have endured and learned so much. By now, the outpost is approaching its 1-year anniversary on Mars, and despite the hardships, all systems are stable. The crew speaks often of the future, of plans for the next planting cycle, of exploring farther afield once spring arrives, even of preparations for the arrival of a second crew in the coming years. Their communications reflect pride and cautious optimism. Mission Control and loved ones on Earth take comfort in the steady cadence of updates. Then, on what would be their final scheduled transmission, the voices of the ghost colony reach across space one last time. The communication comes in on a quiet Martian evening. The commander's tone is calm, giving no hint of alarm. She reports that the team is healthy. They have managed to boost food production and water reserves again after the storm. A new set of geological samples collected from a ridge near the base is yielding exciting preliminary results. In the background, a crewmate jokes about Martian soil getting under his fingernails, drawing warm laughter. The easy laughter of a crew that has weathered many trials and is looking forward to the days ahead. The transmission ends with the commander signing off in the usual way, wishing everyone on Earth a good night and promising to send a more detailed status update the following day. By all appearances, it is a normal, upbeat message, full of relief, achievement, and the expectation of tomorrow. Tomorrow would never come for the ghost colony. When the scheduled transmission time arrives on the next sol, Mars falls silent. Repeated calls from Earth go unanswered. No signal, no static, nothing at all. The people of Earth wait and listen, first with curiosity, then with concern, and finally with dread. The brave voices that had spoken so steadily from across millions of miles have gone quiet. That last cheerful broadcast becomes, by fate, their epitaph, the final known words of the first Martian colonists. What happened after that final transmission remains a haunting mystery, suspended in the thin Martian air. The world is left with a poignant question echoing in the silence. What befell the ghost colony on Mars after their last goodbye? It began with an ordinary transmission window, just like countless others before. High above the rust-red Martian plain, a communications satellite passed overhead, ready to relay the habitat's morning check-in back to Earth. At Mission Control, the incoming signal usually arrived on time like sunrise, bringing routine data and the familiar voices of the crew. On this day, however, when the clock ticked past the expected contact time, the line stayed disturbingly quiet. The consoles in the control room glowed with static-laced silence, and no one's voice came through. Just a day earlier, those voices had been full of light-hearted chatter. The crew joked about the rosy Martian sunrise and celebrated the first lettuce sprouts in their greenhouse. There was no hint of any trouble, only the usual camaraderie across millions of miles. But now the silence pressed down like a weight on everyone in Mission Control. At first, no one panicked. Deep space communication was a delicate dance of timing and technology, and minor delays were not unheard of. Engineers double-checked antennas and network links, calmly assuming a brief glitch in the link. The Mars-Earth connection spanned millions of kilometers, subject to solar flares and atmospheric interference. A slight delay could easily come from a passing cosmic ray or a momentary power blip. Technicians exchanged uncertain looks and waited, confident the stream of data would resume momentarily as it had after minor dropouts in the past. Minutes trickled by at an agonizingly slow pace. The usual hiss of background static felt louder than ever in headsets pressed to ears straining for the faintest hint of a signal. The flight director leaned forward in her chair, brow furrowed, tapping a pencil lightly against her console. A missed check-in window wasn't entirely unprecedented, but it was rare. The room, normally filled with quiet murmurs as data scrolled across screens, was now cloaked in an uneasy hush. People held their breath without realizing it, eyes fixed on monitors that offered no answers. 1 hour passed, then 2, without a whisper from the distant colony. What began as a subtle concern was budding into real anxiety. Protocol dictated multiple communication attempts via different channels, so the team cycled through them all. They pinged the habitat's backup transmitter. They tried reaching the crew's surface rovers and even suit radios, but every effort was met with the same heavy silence. Each failed attempt tightened the knot of worry in their chests. The emptiness on the line felt palpable, as though the distance between planets had grown even vaster. Just the day before, everything had seemed normal. The last transmission from the Mars base had been routine and upbeat. The crew reported a successful maintenance check on the solar panels and laughed about a small joke, something about Martian coffee brewed from some clever engineering of algae. Their voices carried no hint of distress. The data that accompanied their message showed stable life support readings, normal oxygen levels, and an internal habitat temperature that was perfectly comfortable. Nothing at all to suggest that anything was wrong or about to go wrong. It was a day like any other on Mars, until communication ceased. Mission Control replayed that final transmission more than once, searching for any subtle clues they might have missed. In those recorded voices, they found only camaraderie and routine. The video feed, slightly delayed and grainy, had shown the crew's common area with astronauts drifting in and out of view, busy with daily tasks. There was no sign of alarm, no frantic movements, nothing to raise concern. This only deepened the mystery. How could normalcy turn to silence in the span of mere hours? The abrupt end, with no distress call at all, was unfathomable. Initially, some at Mission Control theorized that a local Martian storm might be to blame for the outage. Mars was known for its unpredictable dust storms that could swell without warning, blanketing the sky and disrupting communications. Indeed, a moderate dust storm had been reported in the region a couple of days prior, though it wasn't severe enough to threaten the hardened habitat. Still, the team considered whether static electricity from swirling dust or a power fluctuation from reduced sunlight could have temporarily knocked out the transmitters. If that was the case, perhaps the crew was simply waiting out the storm, conserving power, and would re-establish contact once the skies cleared. For a little while, that thought offered a sliver of comfort. It was easier to imagine the astronauts hunkered down safely inside, maintaining radio silence to save power, than to contemplate more dire alternatives. In line with this hope, Mission Control decided to give it a bit more time. They scheduled the next contact attempt for the following orbital pass of the relay satellite. All they could do was send messages into the void. Instructions, requests for status, even personal greetings from family relayed in text, in case any channel might reach the outpost. Each message was a candle lit in the dark, hopeful and searching. As night fell over the control center back on Earth, the Mars team labored in shifts, refusing to leave their posts for more than short breaks. On Mars, the sun would be rising again over the colony site, painting the landscape in cold morning light. Another chance for the base's systems to charge up and come back online if they had gone dark. But when that next scheduled pass came, and then the next after that, Mars remained silent. By now, a quiet dread had settled over everyone. The silence was stretching too long. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and they all knew it. The flight director finally broke from protocol's calm patience and declared an internal alert. The mission control room's lights shifted to a dim amber, indicating a serious situation, and additional specialists were called in from home in the dead of night. They arrived bleary-eyed yet alert, coffee in hand, minds racing through checklists of what could cause a total communications blackout. Possibilities were debated in urgent whispers at the back of the room. A meteor strike on the habitat, a catastrophic systems failure, an emergency that left the crew unable to respond. Each scenario seemed more grim than the last, and with each passing hour, the weight of the unknown grew. In those tense early hours of radio silence, the mission team toggled between hope and fear. They reminded each other of past incidents, where communications had been lost, only to resume days later. One engineer recounted a probe that went quiet during a solar conjunction when the sun's interference blocked signals, only to return to normal once the alignment shifted. Another recalled a time a lunar orbiter went offline due to a computer crash and rebooted itself after a long, silent night. These stories were shared like campfire tales, each meant to kindle optimism that maybe, just maybe, this too would resolve with a benign explanation. Yet the differences here were stark and hard to ignore. This wasn't an uncrewed probe or a known communication blackout during a planetary alignment. This was a permanent human outpost with multiple redundancies and a crew trained for emergencies. The sheer totality of the silence, every channel dead, not even a basic telemetry ping, felt ominous. By the time the sun rose on another day at mission control, fatigue and worry etched lines on every face in the room. The silence had continued for more than 24 hours. A full day without contact was the threshold no one wanted to cross. According to the mission's emergency guidelines, that duration of unbroken silence officially constituted a communications emergency. The crew on Mars had been well aware of this protocol too. If they were capable, they would move Heaven and Mars to restore contact before that deadline passed. The fact that they hadn't suggested that either the base's communication array was completely incapacitated or the crew themselves were somehow unable to send a message. Neither possibility boded well. The moment that grim milestone passed, the flight director took a deep breath and formally declared a mission emergency. Her voice, usually so steady during routine operations, was hushed but clear as it echoed in the silent room. They were in an emergency situation. Teams snapped into action with a flurry of activity. There were specific contingency plans on file for such an event, plans that everyone had trained for but fervently hoped never to use. In those plans, this scenario was labelled Loss of Signal, Indeterminate Cause, a sterile title for what felt like a nightmare slowly unfolding. Even as the emergency was declared, deep down each person still harboured a hope that at any moment a sudden chirp of static might break the quiet and a familiar voice crackle through, laughing and apologising for the scare. But each empty second made that hope harder to hold. Mars had gone quiet, and until something changed, Earth could do nothing but listen, worry, and begin the long process of searching for answers in the dark. Word of the communications blackout quickly climbed the chain of command. By the second day of silence, the directors of the Mars mission convened an emergency meeting with top officials and advisors. In a secure conference room, half a world away from the quiet control center, voices were low and tense as they discussed next steps. The situation was unprecedented. Never before had Earth lost contact with a crew living on another planet. The gravity of that realization hung heavy in the room. Everyone understood that if the colony truly was in trouble, Immediate help was nearly impossible. Mars was not just around the corner, it was tens of millions of kilometers away, a gulf that no urgent rescue team could leap across in an instant. The first priority on Earth was to rule out any simple explanation that might still be hiding in the data. So before sounding alarms to the wider public, mission managers pored over every technical detail. Engineers scrutinized the Deep Space Network receivers for signs of malfunction, triple-checking that Earth's end was operating perfectly. Spacecraft operators sent new commands to the communications orbiter circling Mars, instructing it to sweep its antenna across a broader arc in case the habitat's transmitter had drifted off alignment. For several long hours, a small army of experts tried to eliminate any plausible scenario where this was all just a technical blip. Each passing hour with no response made that hope fade a little more. On Earth, news of the lost signal had not yet been made public. Only those directly involved, or with a need to know, were aware that Mars had essentially gone dark. The mission team was keenly conscious of avoiding undue panic. Families of the astronauts were quietly notified that a communication issue was being investigated, but they too were reassured that it could be a routine outage. Some of the family members had been through space mission scares before. An unexpected radio silence during a lunar mission years back, or an oxygen sensor glitch that caused a false alarm. They clung to those memories as comfort, hoping this would turn out the same. A scare, nothing more. Behind closed doors, however, the tone was shifting from hopeful troubleshooting to urgent contingency planning. By the third day of silence, it was clear to all the engineers and scientists involved that this was not a simple communications failure. Multiple redundant systems would have to fail simultaneously to cause such a complete blackout, an event with an almost negligible probability under normal conditions. That realization sent a chill through everyone. If equipment failure was that unlikely, it implied something else had happened at the colony itself. Perhaps a disaster had knocked out power, or some event had transpired that prevented the crew from using their communications gear. Neither option was comforting. With heavy hearts, mission leadership began drafting a statement to the world. They knew they could not keep this under wraps much longer. Mars was humanity's shared endeavor, watched by millions of curious eyes. Already, a few keen observers in the amateur astronomy and radio communities were noticing that scheduled signals from Mars were missing, sparking quiet chatter online. The agency wanted to get ahead of rumors with a careful, honest announcement. Words were chosen meticulously. It would mention an unexpected loss of communications, and that all efforts were underway to re-establish contact. It would avoid words like disaster or failure, keeping the focus on hope and on the ongoing investigation. When the announcement finally went public, it was delivered by the space agency's administrator in a solemn televised briefing. The world stopped to listen. People who had followed the Mars mission from the beginning, who felt personally invested in those pioneers on the red planet, held their breath at the news. The administrator's tone was calm, yet carried a weight that was unmistakable. She explained that the Mars base had not responded to communications for several days, and while this could be due to a technical issue, the agency was treating it with utmost seriousness. She assured the public that international partners were offering support, and that no resource would be spared in figuring out what had happened and how to assist. The public reaction was a mix of stunned disbelief and an outpouring of concern. In an instant, the Mars mission dominated headlines and conversations around the globe. Just days prior, those astronauts had been sharing upbeat updates about daily life on another world, and now they were unreachable. Vigils spontaneously formed in cities worldwide, candlelight gatherings where people looked up at the night sky, knowing that one of those distant pinpoints of light was Mars, shining faintly with all their hopes. Schools that had been following the mission as part of science projects held special assemblies to talk to students about what was happening, trying to reassure them that every effort was being made to regain contact with the crew. To the families of the missing astronauts, the days of uncertainty were an unbearable limbo. They gathered at mission control or kept constant vigil by their phones, desperate for any scrap of news. Agency officials and counsellors stayed by their side, offering support that felt hollow in the face of the unknown. In quiet conference rooms, husbands, wives, parents, and children of the crew clung to hope together, sharing nervous laughs over memories one moment and sitting in tearful silence the next. Around the world, countless strangers sent them messages of prayer and solidarity, forming a global circle of concern for the fate of the Mars explorers. Meanwhile, media outlets and pundits filled the airwaves with speculation. Some posited that a minor systems glitch had simply cut communications and that the crew might be safely hunkered down, waiting for help. Others floated far worse scenarios, from a sudden habitat depressurization to a lethal Martian storm. The term ghost colony began appearing in headlines and online discussions as people grappled with the eerie idea of a base on Mars with no one in it. With so little concrete information to go on, all anyone could do was debate theories and anxiously await real answers. Inside Mission Control, the initial scramble of activity settled into a steady, determined rhythm. Teams were expanded to include specialists from every relevant field. Life support experts analysed the last known habitat telemetry to estimate how long systems could run without human intervention. Medical advisors pondered whether an illness or accident could have incapacitated the crew. Orbital mechanics teams mapped out how to use satellites and spacecraft to aid in the investigation. A psychological support group quietly stayed in touch with the astronauts' families, helping them cope with the stress of not knowing, of waiting by the phone for news that had yet to come. In those early strategy sessions, one agonizing truth underpinned all discussions. Any physical rescue or intervention was many months away at best. The colony was on its own out there, and it had been since the moment the signal was lost. If the crew were in danger, there was no way to get immediate assistance to them. The sense of helplessness was crushing for the engineers and astronauts in training who had dedicated their lives to supporting the people on Mars. Some had close personal friendships with the colonists, having trained alongside them. Imagining their friends in trouble and not being able to help fueled a quiet desperation to do something, anything. Planners turned their attention to the next possible launch window to Mars. By a stroke of timing, a supply mission had been tentatively scheduled for launch in only a few months, part of the routine cadence to keep the colony provisioned. Now that mission's purpose would drastically change. Instead of a simple cargo delivery, it could be repurposed as an unmanned investigation probe, carrying additional sensors and perhaps even a small rover to the site. The logistics of such a conversion were daunting, but teams began work immediately, racing against the clock to design new payloads that could help unravel the mystery at the Martian outpost. International partners also offered their assets and expertise. Space agencies from other countries had orbiters around Mars and robotic landers on its surface. They coordinated to redirect cameras and instruments toward the region of the colony, hoping to glean any clues from afar. In a rare display of global unity, the mission to understand what happened on Mars transcended politics and national interests. Everyone simply wanted to find the missing astronauts and bring them to safety, or at least to find out what fate had befallen them. As the days turned into a week with still no word, the initial shock began to settle into a stark reality. This was now a search operation. Though no one spoke the fear aloud, some privately wondered if it might eventually become a recovery operation rather than a rescue. But as long as there was uncertainty, hope remained. The mission team clung to that hope as they methodically executed their plans. Every piece of data that trickled in from Mars, however scant, was analysed for meaning. Tiny blips in radiation readings, minuscule fluctuations in thermal signatures at the base site, any anomaly that could serve as a sign of life or activity was scrutinised in exhaustive detail. Throughout this tense period, communication with the Mars outpost remained a one-way street. Earth kept sending messages in the blind, updating the crew on what was being done, urging them to respond if they could. The emptiness of not hearing back was, at times, demoralizing. One night, a communications specialist at the Deep Space Network kept her headset on long after her shift ended, whispering softly as if the people on Mars might somehow hear her comforting words through the void. It was a gesture born of empathy and heartache, emblematic of how deeply those on Earth cared for the silent pioneers so far away. The delayed emergency was unlike any crisis Earth had faced before. In maritime disasters of centuries past, a ship might go missing, and it could be weeks before anyone knew. In those days, search parties would eventually set sail, scanning empty horizons for any sign of life. Now, in the space age, we found ourselves in a similar predicament on an interplanetary scale. We had technology that could watch a rover trundle across Martian soil and hear the faint whispers of a probe beyond Pluto. Yet we could not immediately know the fate of our own people on Mars. It was a humbling reminder of distance and the limits of our reach. Every sunrise on Earth brought renewed determination. Teams reported into morning briefings with dark circles under their eyes, but resolve in their hearts. They refined plans for remote sensing, debated the best timing and trajectory for a potential rescue mission, and continuously asked themselves what the crew on Mars would do to survive if they were in trouble. The colonists were well trained for emergencies. They would not give up easily. That thought was a lifeline that kept everyone pushing forward. If the crew was fighting to stay alive, then Earth would fight just as hard to find them and bring them home. So, even as the situation remained painfully unresolved, the foundation was laid for a comprehensive search effort. In the coming days and weeks, that effort would unfold in multiple stages, from orbit, from the Martian skies, and eventually on the very ground the colonists had trodden. But all of it began with a difficult truth. For now, Earth could only watch, wait, and plan from afar, battling the tyranny of distance and time, in the hope that somewhere in the silence, the lost voices of Mars might still be waiting to be heard. Within days, the first phase of the search swung into action. Robotic eyes in the Martian sky turned toward the silent colony, gathering whatever information they could from a distance. High above the planet, an array of orbiters adjusted their paths for optimal views of the habitat. One by one, they glided over the site, snapping high-resolution images and scanning in different spectra. Back on Earth, teams awaited these downloads with tense anticipation. Each blurry photograph that resolved on screen was studied minutely, every pixel a potential clue to the fate of the mission. The initial orbital images brought a measure of relief, albeit a small one. The habitat itself appeared to be intact. In the overhead shots, the cluster of living modules and storage units stood undisturbed on the ochre surface. The solar arrays, which provided auxiliary power, were still in place, though dusted over from recent winds. A tall communications mast cast a long shadow in the Martian afternoon. Outwardly, it looked unbroken. There were no obvious scorch marks, no crater or debris field, no sign of an explosion or meteor strike. From hundreds of kilometers up, everything looked eerily normal, as if the colony was simply going about its day. Yet there were subtle, troubling signs. One image taken at local dusk showed the habitat in darkness, without the usual pinpoints of light that would glow in its windows when the crew was active during their evening hours. If the base was running on automatic power-saving mode, it might have dimmed the lights, or it could mean a loss of power entirely. Thermal scans from an infrared mapping instrument added to the concern. Normally, the habitat's main module would radiate a gentle warmth after sundown, evidence of heating systems at work. Now it registered as almost the same temperature as the surrounding terrain, a cold spot on a cold planet. Only a small bright patch marked the nuclear generator nearby, indicating it was still producing heat. This suggested that while the reactor continued to run, perhaps the distribution of power within the outpost had failed. The heart of the colony was beating, but its warmth had fled. As more imagery came in, analysts noticed something peculiar regarding the vehicles at the site. The colonists had 2 pressurized rovers for exploration and backup shelter. On images from just a few weeks earlier, both rovers could be seen parked near the habitat. In the new photographs, however, one of those rovers was no longer visible at its usual spot. Only one rover remained next to the habitat, half buried in a thin veil of dust. The other was simply gone from the camera's view. There were no discernible tracks leading away from the base, at least none that the satellite could resolve. Martian winds might have erased them quickly. The disappearance of that rover set off a flurry of speculation on Earth. Could the crew have evacuated in that vehicle, driving it somewhere beyond the orbiter's imaging range? If so, where would they go on the barren expanse of Mars? It was a fragment of a clue, and it fueled hope and worry in equal measure. Meanwhile, mission controllers attempted a more direct form of exploration, contacting any automated drones or rovers that might still be operable on the ground. Before losing contact, the colony had maintained a few unmanned assets, for instance, a lightweight aerial drone used to survey the local terrain, and a small robotic rover for hauling equipment. Normally, these machines were operated via the habitat's network, but engineers worked out a way to reach them through the orbiting relay satellite. Commands were sent to the aerial drone to take off and perform a brief reconnaissance flight over the outpost. Given the communication delay, the drone's flight plan had to be pre-programmed and executed autonomously once received, a daring attempt to gather data with no real-time control. After anxious hours, the drone's data began to trickle back. It had indeed lifted off in the thin Martian air and managed a slow pass over the silent habitat. Its onboard camera captured a bird's-eye view, far more detailed than the high-orbit satellites could provide. In the footage, the habitat's dome and connected modules showed no breaches or signs of damage on their outer surfaces. The main airlock was closed, exactly as it should be. The exterior life support units, the oxygen generators and water recyclers, all sat in place, looking undisturbed. From above, nothing looked obviously wrong except for the utter stillness of it all. No suited figures moved about below. No tools or equipment lay abandoned outside. It was as if the entire site had simply paused in time. The drone then widened its search pattern, venturing beyond the immediate base. It skimmed low over the surrounding terrain, its cameras scanning for any sign of the missing rover or the crew farther out. The drone followed the path of the main trail leading away from the habitat, a route the explorers often took on excursions. Nothing unusual appeared along that route, just endless dust and rocks tinged red by rusted iron. However, at one point, the drone's infrared sensor did register something faint on the ground, a subtle line of warmth meandering into the distance. Analysts on Earth wondered if this could be the residual heat from the tracks of a rover's wheels. The trail, if it was one, was patchy and grew colder and harder to distinguish as it went on, until it vanished into the background of the chill Martian evening. If the rover had driven off in that direction, it left only the most ghostly of footprints for the drone to find. Encouraged by the drone's success, controllers next attempted to reach the small robotic utility rover left near the habitat. Amazingly, a handshake signal came back. The little rover was alive and listening. Using careful commands relayed via orbit, they drove it a short distance around the base. Its cameras were lower resolution than the aerial drones, but it could trundle right up to the structures and look at details on the ground level. The rover rolled to the main airlock door and paused. The door was shut tight, and nothing obvious blocked it. A sensor on the rover detected the faintest trace of oxygen seeping out. A normal reading near any airlock, not a sign of a gaping leak. Satisfied that the entrance was secure, the rover continued its slow circuit around the habitat. It then completed a careful circle around the habitat, inspecting the exterior walls for cracks or signs of impact. The structures appeared sound and unharmed, a testament to the habitat's sturdy engineering. That result was a relief on one hand, but it was also a frustration. A gaping hole or obvious damage would have at least provided an explanation. Instead, with the exterior seemingly in perfect shape, the mystery only deepened. Through these robotic eyes, Earth now saw a haunting tableau. The colony was intact and apparently functional, yet no human figures stirred. Every external item was in its rightful place. Tools were neatly stowed, and the remaining vehicle sat parked where it should be. It truly looked as though the crew had stepped out only moments before, expecting to return at any time. The eerie calm of the sight raised more questions than it answered. Why would trained astronauts abandon their only sanctuary on Mars, especially without a word? If some internal disaster had driven them out, a fire, a sudden toxic leak, surely there would have been signs, or the crew would have triggered emergency beacons. But the drones picked up no distress signals, no alarm klaxons ringing out in the thin air. Every clue gathered showed a place that, outwardly, remained normal. And paradoxically, that very normalcy made the absence of the people more baffling. Instead of clarity, each new observation deepened the enigma surrounding this ghost colony. Back on Earth, teams of specialists struggled to assemble these disparate clues into a coherent story. Their hypotheses shifted with each bit of data that arrived. Some experts suspected a contained catastrophe, perhaps an internal fire or chemical accident that rendered the habitat uninhabitable without leaving external scars. Others considered an acute medical emergency, or even an unknown pathogen, an invisible threat that could have compelled the crew to flee. Yet for every scenario proposed, a contradiction lurked. If there had been a fire, why no soot or scorch marks on the airlock or exterior? If a toxic leak, why had no one activated remote alarms or left some sign of evacuation procedure? Each idea ran up against gaps, and no theory fully made sense of all the evidence at hand. In the end, one conclusion grew increasingly certain. To find the truth, someone would have to go to the colony and see up close. The orbiters and drones had reached the limit of what they could tell us. If the fate of the Mars expedition was to be discovered, the investigation would have to set foot on Martian soil. Thus, the next phase of the mission began to take shape. Despite the daunting challenges, plans were being laid to send new probes, and eventually a human-led mission to the silent outpost. The colony had been found untouched, but empty. Now humanity prepared to bridge the millions of kilometers and confront the unknowns waiting on that distant world. Months of painstaking preparation and interplanetary travel finally led to the next critical phase of the search, touching down on Martian soil once more. Long after the colony had gone silent, a specially outfitted reconnaissance mission arrived in orbit around Mars. A sleek new lander, packed with survey instruments and an autonomous rover, detached from its transport ship and began its descent. In mission control on Earth, a hush fell as telemetry showed the craft piercing the thin Martian atmosphere. Every person watching knew what was at stake. This lander carried hopes of answers, perhaps even of rescue, however slim that hope might be. Buffeted by high-altitude winds and guided by retro rockets, the unmanned lander set down on the Ochre Plains, a few kilometers from the silent habitat. It was a cautious choice to land a short distance away. No one could be certain of surface conditions right next to the base, and caution was paramount. The moment its legs settled onto the soil and the dust began to clear, the rover rolled out from its berth. This new rover was larger and more capable than the little utility bot already at the colony. It had been built to traverse difficult terrain and even attempt entry into structures if necessary. Under distant guidance, it began the journey toward the colony, an emissary sent to knock on the door of the ghostly outpost. As the rover crested a gentle rise separating the landing site from the habitat, the familiar shapes of the colony came into view. The sight was both heartening and eerie. Against the reddish landscape stood the cluster of habitat modules, exactly where they should be, unchanged from all the satellite photos. In the sharp clarity of the rover's close-up cameras, the habitat looked quiet, but fundamentally intact. The afternoon sun cast long shadows from the buildings, and everything was still. It was a desolate scene of normality, a base that should have been alive with activity, now frozen in utter quiet. The rover paused at a safe distance, surveying the surroundings for any hazards. Radiation levels were normal. Chemical sensors sniffed the thin air and found nothing alarming. No toxic gases, no smoke, no sign of chemical spills. If some calamity had happened here, it left no obvious trace in the environment. Cautiously, the rover inched closer to the main habitat module. It navigated around a parked trailer and past some storage containers that lay exactly where they had been left weeks or months ago. The silence was profound. Even the wind seemed to have died down, as if Mars itself were holding its breath. When the rover reached the habitat's entrance area, it performed a slow circle, cameras recording every angle. The main airlock hatch was closed and latched. The exterior control panel beside it was unlit. Understandable if the habitat had lost power. The rover extended a small robotic arm to gently tap on the hull, a literal knock to see if anyone inside might respond. The metal shell returned only a dull thud that faded quickly. There was no answering sound from within. No movement behind the small porthole window set in the airlock door. Next, the rover deployed instruments at the airlock, searching for clues in the habitat's trapped air. A laser sensor confirmed the interior was still pressurized with breathable atmosphere. However, the analysis showed elevated carbon dioxide and lowered oxygen levels, as if life support hadn't scrubbed the air in quite some time. The implication was chilling. If the crew had remained inside, their air would have grown dangerously stale. It might explain why they were forced to leave, and it hinted that the systems had been offline far longer than anyone could survive inside. With these data points collected, the rover stood by. It had no means to open the airlock on its own. That would require either a human hand or specialized tools that weren't included in this rushed mission. Breaking into the habitat was considered a last resort and was not attempted yet, partly out of caution and partly in hope that human explorers would soon arrive to do it more delicately. The rover instead continued to monitor the site, acting as an advanced scout and guardian. Its camera occasionally panned across the empty Martian horizon, as if expecting at any moment to see astronauts walking toward it. But the landscape remained vacant and still. Back on Earth, the clock was ticking down to the arrival of a more daring mission. A small crew of astronauts launched under emergency orders to follow the unmanned lander. Unlike the original colonists, who departed on a planned schedule. This team had been sent as soon as a booster and capsule could be readied. They trained intensively during the long transit, drilling for every scenario they might face, from disaster recovery to medical emergencies. Throughout the journey, they received updates on the rover's findings at the colony. By the time they neared Mars, they knew the basics of the situation. The habitat was intact, but likely powerless. No obvious external hazards had been seen, and their comrades were nowhere in sight. When the rescue crew's spacecraft finally braked into Mars orbit and prepared for descent, the world once again tuned in. This time, it was not a celebratory landing of eager pioneers, but a solemn voyage into the unknown. It was also the first attempt at an interplanetary rescue mission, a unifying moment of hope and anxiety for all watching back on Earth. In the thin pre-dawn light of the Martian morning, the crew's lander detached and fell toward the surface, headed for a flat expanse just a short drive from the colony. The landing, though automated, felt intensely personal to those inside. As the capsule's engines roared for final descent, the astronauts peered out of small portholes, catching their first glimpse of the outpost they had heard about for so long. It looked tiny against the vast desert, a cluster of shapes casting soft shadows in the early light. The lander touched down with a gentle thump. They had arrived. For a moment, the crew sat in silence, collecting themselves and confirming that all systems were nominal after landing. They exchanged glances of determination and a hint of dread. What lay ahead was unprecedented. Out of an abundance of caution, they donned their EVA suits before opening the hatch. Until they could be certain the environment around the colony was safe, they weren't taking any chances with potential contaminants or unknown hazards. The Martian air, though unbreathable, carried no obvious peril as per the rover's reports, but the suits stayed on as a vital precaution. Stepping down the lander's ramp, the rescue team set foot on Mars, knowing they were walking into an unsolved mystery. The lead astronaut, a geologist who had trained alongside some of the missing crew, took a deep breath inside his helmet as he saw the habitat in the distance. He felt the weight of both Mars' gravity and responsibility pressing on him. This was not the triumphant first step of explorers on a new world. It was a cautious approach to a place now tinged with tragedy. They deployed a small rover they'd brought along and loaded it with emergency gear and supplies. Though only a few kilometers separated them from the main base, they moved deliberately across the rocky plain. The drive toward the silent colony was surreal. One of the crew members quietly recited the names of each person who had lived at the base, as if invoking their spirits or reminding Mars that these people mattered and would not be forgotten. Over the radio, Mission Control occasionally chimed in with guidance, but mostly let the astronauts work in relative calm. Every so often, the team paused to run a check of their surroundings, scanning with portable instruments for any anomalies, radiation spikes, strange chemical traces, anything. The readings remained ordinary. As the astronauts drew nearer, more fine details became visible. The habitat's exterior looked weathered by dust but sound. A layer of reddish grit clung to much of its surface, accumulated over months of unmaintenance, though there were also streaks swept clean by recent breezes. Solar panels were dull with dust. A small antenna on the comms mast wobbled slightly, having worked itself loose without upkeep. No footprints were visible leading away from the habitat, likely erased by shifting sands or obscured by dust. The rover that had been missing in satellite images was still absent from the immediate area. Presumably it was out there somewhere beyond the horizon, a question for later. At last, the rescue team arrived at the main entrance of the habitat. Their rover and the one already on site stood side by side, machines from different missions quietly exchanging blinking status lights. The astronauts disembarked and approached the airlock on foot. Even though they expected no answer, one of them knocked firmly on the metal door. The sound was flat and final. They called out, identifying themselves and asking if anyone inside could hear them. Only their own breaths in their helmets answered. The moment had come to open the habitat, a task filled with both hope and dread. Working carefully, they connected an external power pack to the airlock controls, hoping to power up the mechanism. With a whir, the panel flickered to life, accepting the emergency override codes the crew carried. The outer door seal released with a hiss of equalizing pressure. The astronauts stepped back reflexively, letting their suit sensors sniff the initial air that escaped. It matched the rover's analysis. High in CO2, low in oxygen, no immediate toxins, essentially the stale, trapped breath of a long-abandoned dwelling. Manual override lights blinked green. The outer door of the airlock creaked open. With their headlamps cutting beams through the dim interior, the rescue team made their way into the small chamber, two at a time. They closed the outer hatch behind them and initiated the sequence to open the inner door. Normally, a welcoming voice, or at least the bustle of a crew, would be waiting on the other side. Instead, as the inner airlock door slid aside, it revealed darkness and silence. The beam of an astronaut's flashlight pierced down the habitat's main corridor, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the disturbed air. After so long, humans were entering the habitat once more, but no one was there to greet them. Inside the habitat, the beams of the astronauts' flashlights danced across a scene that was both ordinary and unsettling. The air was cold and stale, and without the usual hum of machinery, an uncanny silence prevailed. As the team stepped carefully through the main corridor, their bootfalls echoed against metal floors. They were standing in what had been the living quarters of the Mars expedition, a place that should have been filled with voices and warmth. Instead, it felt frozen in time. One by one, the rescuers began to restore minimal power to the habitat, using the portable energy packs they'd brought. Emergency lights flickered on, casting a dim amber glow that pushed back some of the darkness. In that faint light, details emerged all around them. In the galley area, a table was set for a meal that never finished. Plates and mugs lay exactly where they had been left, the food on them long dried out. A half-eaten packet of rehydrated vegetable stew, now reduced to a hard crust, sat next to a cup half filled with water. It was as if the crew had been interrupted mid-bite and expected to return at any moment. The sight sent a chill through the astronauts. It painted a picture of a normal evening suddenly upended. Moving deeper inside, they found the personal quarters, small sleeping berths for each colonist. Each bunk was a snapshot of its occupant's life. Photographs of family back on Earth were taped to a wall, the smiling faces now coated in dust. One bunk had a plush toy still velcroed in place above the pillow, a gift from a loved one back home. Another had a journal lying open on the mattress. Its last entry was dated just a day before the signal loss, describing a routine water filter repair and looking forward to the weekend movie night. There was no hint of fear or impending doom in those words, only normal daily life on Mars. The astronauts carefully picked up the journal and added it to the items for analysis, but it offered no clue beyond the abrupt stop of its entries. In the equipment locker by the airlock, the hooks where the crew's EVA suits normally hung were empty. All the standard spacesuits were gone, taken by the crew when they left. A nearby emergency supply checklist indicated that many essential items, oxygen tanks, medical kits, rations, had been removed as well. Clearly, the astronauts had gathered these items before evacuating. This was no panicked flight into the unknown. It looked like an organized evacuation. But to where and why? In the operations center, the habitat's main command console was found dark and unpowered. The astronauts connected a portable battery, bringing the monitors faintly back to life. Data logs began scrolling across the screen, and the team quickly downloaded all of it for analysis. A brief review showed that systems had been shutting down one after another around the time contact was lost. The communications log was full of errors. The transmitter had failed, then power levels dipped repeatedly. The final event entry was time-stamped at the moment of the silence. It reported a cascade of life support failures, and then nothing more. There was no last message from the crew saved in the computer. If they had tried to send one, it never made it out. As lights warmed the interior, the team fanned out through each module. In the laboratory section, experiments lay abandoned. Petri dishes with biological cultures had grown strange feathery colonies unchecked, and a chemical analysis rig had overflowed when its collection flask filled, and no one was there to turn it off. These small signs of neglect spoke volumes. Whatever pulled the crew away, they never returned to tend even the simplest of tasks. A microscope was left on. Its bulb had burned out. In a corner of the lab, a laptop was found with a cracked screen. It looked like it had fallen from a bench. An astronaut carefully bagged it, noting that its battery was dead, but it might contain valuable notes or data logs. Every item that seemed out of place or unusually untouched was catalogued for later study. The greenhouse module was perhaps the bleakest sight. What had been a pocket of vibrant green, a slice of earth on Mars where vegetables and herbs grew under bright grow lamps, was now a withered brown tangle. The grow lights were off, and everything inside had wilted in the cold and dark. Rows of once healthy plants were dried and crumbling. A few shriveled tomatoes hung on their vines like little red ghosts. A watering hose lay on the floor, its last spray of water long evaporated and leaving a dusty mineral crust. It looked as if someone had been in the middle of tending this garden when everything stopped. For the rescuers, seeing this silent garden was heart-wrenching. The colonists had nurtured these plants not just for food, but as a reminder of life from home, and now that life had been snuffed out. Over the next hours, the astronauts conducted a thorough sweep of the habitat, calling out their findings, and lack of findings, to mission control. Room by room, they confirmed that no one was hiding, no bodies, no survivors, nothing. The medical bay was tidy and fully stocked, suggesting there had been no obvious medical emergency, at least not one treated there. A stretcher was pulled out in the middle of the floor, as if prepared for a patient, but it was empty. Cabinets of medicine were undisturbed aside from whatever might have been taken in a medkit. In the workshop, tools were still neatly arranged on the wall pegs, except for a few missing items, likely taken along for the road. Outside the habitat, 2 astronauts opened the vehicle garage and found it empty. The secondary rover was parked just outside as expected, but the main rover was gone. A clipboard inside showed the rover was taken out on the day contact was lost, with no return recorded. It appeared the entire crew had departed in that vehicle. The team reported this finding to Earth, confirming that the colonists likely evacuated using the rover. This discovery raised as many questions as it answered. Driving off into the Martian wilderness would only make sense if they had somewhere to go. Perhaps there was a predetermined safe haven or cache they aimed for. Mission planners recalled a remote supply depot about 100 kilometers to the north, where an automated cargo lander had dropped extra provisions months earlier. Could the crew have been attempting to reach that location? It was only speculation, but it provided at least a direction for the next phase of the search. After completing the interior survey, the astronauts gathered in the habitat's galley area, the very space where the colonists once shared meals and laughter, and held a brief, somber conference. Through their helmet radios, they described the situation to mission control and to each other, piecing together a narrative of what they had seen. The picture was growing clearer in some respects. A technical failure of some sort had likely crippled the base, forcing the crew to evacuate with supplies and the primary rover. But why no word from them afterward? The rover had communication equipment that should have been able to at least send a distress beacon, even if the habitat systems were down. There was still a thick fog of uncertainty shrouding the final fate of the colonists. One astronaut picked up a family photo that had been left on the table, its edges curled from Mars's dry air. The smiling faces of a spouse and 2 children beamed up at her from years in the past. She spoke softly, as if to the absent crew. "We'll find you. We'll find out what happened." Her voice, thick with emotion, carried only into her suit's microphone, but it seemed to steal everyone's resolve. They were not just investigators on a mission. They were comrades determined to bring closure to the story of the people who had lived here. The team began to pack up anything that might serve as evidence or provide clues. They secured the habitat's computer drives, gathered handwritten logs and notebooks, collected personal tablets, and even sampled the air and water remaining in the tanks in case subtle contaminants or clues lurked there. Every item was a potential piece of the puzzle. In the commander's quarters, they found a small mission flag pinned to the wall alongside a crew portrait taken on launch day. All those faces, hopeful and proud. They left it undisturbed. In the quiet, they could almost imagine the echoes of laughter and conversation that once filled these halls. Exiting the habitat, the crew left a small light on inside, a beacon of hope in the darkened interior. They also left a transmitter broadcasting a repeating message in case any of the crew returned, a promise that help had arrived and would return again. It felt wrong to leave it completely dark and cold, as they had found it. The sun was dipping low on the horizon now, casting a reddish twilight glow over the site. The astronauts stood together outside for a moment, looking back at the structure that had sheltered their friends and colleagues. It was hard to shake the feeling that the colony was now a tomb of memories, a home that had lost its inhabitants. Their job in this part of the mission was done. They had confirmed the worst. The colony was deserted, but also uncovered the first breadcrumbs of a trail that might lead to answers. The crew transferred their collected samples and data to their lander and prepared for ascent. In the early light of the following morning, the rescue lander's engines ignited, carrying the astronauts and precious evidence back towards orbit. As they lifted off, they gazed down at the lonely outpost one last time. The habitat, with its light glowing faintly inside, grew smaller and smaller against the vast ochre expanse, until it was just a speck, then nothing at all. For now, they had to leave it behind. Night fell over the ghost colony once more. The habitat's windows glowed faintly with the emergency lights left on inside, a solitary beacon shining over the barren land. No silhouettes moved within, and no voices echoed through its halls, only the soft whir of a few fans and the distant whisper of the Martian wind. The questions of what force had driven the crew away, where they had gone, and whether any of them could still be alive, lingered heavier than ever. In the quiet of that Martian night, the empty habitat kept its silent vigil, waiting for answers to come, as Earth and its explorers vowed to unravel the mystery of the vanished Mars expedition. The colony's hub lies in silence. Once filled with voices and busy routines, it is now as quiet as a forgotten cathedral at night. Soft beams of artificial light still glow along the corridors, their presence automated and indifferent to the absence of life. Thin red dust has crept in through unseen cracks, gathering in corners and tracing faint orange ghosts across the floor. A lone ventilation fan still turns gently somewhere, its distant murmur a reminder that some machines continue their endless duty. But the rhythm is off, too slow, as if the machinery itself is tired and mournful. Each hiss of air and click of a relay echoes through empty rooms where astronauts laughed, worked, and dreamed of a new world. Now, only the soft mechanical lullaby remains to break the abyssal hush. In this vacuum of life, time seems to stand still. A half-written logbook lies open on a table, pages unmoved by any breeze. A mug sits abandoned on a counter, its contents long dried to a faint residue. Tools are scattered near an access panel, as if someone stepped away just for a moment, meaning to return. Every detail suggests an interruption, a story that paused abruptly, waiting for an ending that never came. Without human voices, the habitat feels suspended in that paused story. The air holds a charge of unanswered questions. How could a place built for hope and survival become a tomb of uncertainty? As rescuers and loved ones search for meaning, theories form and drift like dust motes in the sunlight. The mind reaches for explanations in the void. One notion looms quietly among them, born from the very hum of those machines that still faintly stir. It is a simple, sobering idea that clings to the silent air. With all their ingenuity, could it be that the technology meant to preserve life here instead faltered and sealed the colonists' fate? Perhaps a critical system failed in the dark of a Martian night, turning this sanctuary into a trap. In the stillness, one can almost imagine an alarm light blinking softly, casting a warning glow that went unseen until it was too late. Picture a gentle Martian midnight, the crew asleep in their bunks, as a hidden fault begins to snake its way through the colony's systems. Perhaps a cooling pump in the reactor stops ticking smoothly, or a vital valve in the oxygen generator sticks half closed. The change would start small, a slight temperature rise here, a minor drop in air quality there, subtle enough that the automated monitors might not yet sound an alarm. For a while, the habitat's redundant designs could mask the sickness spreading through its mechanical organs. But inevitably, the fragile balance would tip. In the command module, a warning light flickers to life in the hush. A sensor notices that oxygen pressure is falling, slowly but surely. An electronic pulse tries to trigger the backup system. But what if the backup, too, was compromised or unready? A second light joins the first, blinking urgently in the empty control room. Perhaps one of the colonists stirs at the edge of sleep, sensing something amiss. In the darkness, an alarm chime finally breaks the silence, soft but persistent, like a distant beacon. The commander, ever vigilant even in rest, might be the first to awaken. Blinking away confusion, he registers the alarm's glow and the faint hiss of depressurizing air. In that moment, a calm yet urgent rehearsal of emergency procedures snaps to life in his mind. Lights snap on, and the crew scrambles out of their dreams into a waking nightmare. They have trained for this, practiced drills for sudden decompression or system collapse. Yet the air already tastes thin and metallic. Each breath becomes precious. One astronaut rushes to the life support console, fingers flying over controls to isolate the leak or restart the faltering machines. Another heads for the pressure suit stowed by the wall, shouting for everyone to gear up, their voice echoing in the dome. Imagine the scene bathed in the red emergency glow, gloved hands fumbling with seals, wide eyes meeting in wordless understanding that something catastrophic is unfolding. The hiss of escaping air grows louder despite their efforts. The temperature begins to plummet as heating systems falter without power or pressure. In the greenhouse module, plants crucial for renewing oxygen wither in the sudden chill, leaves shimmering with frost under stuttering lights. Even so, The crew fights calmly and desperately. They follow their training, voices low and steady over the comms inside their suit helmets. They try one system after another. Perhaps they manage to seal off a damaged compartment to slow the leak. Perhaps they flip the switches to activate reserve oxygen tanks, only to find them drained or unresponsive. It could be a perfect storm of failures, a cascade triggered by one innocent flaw that now multiplies beyond control. In minutes that feel like hours, reality sets in. If the habitat cannot hold air, if power dies completely, the colony that was their shelter becomes uninhabitable. The commander might make the hardest decision of all, to abandon the base itself. We can envision a final radio call attempted, a mayday sent into the dark if any comm channel still breathes to life, even though the colony's link to Earth may already be severed. With no response and time vanishing, they gather what emergency supplies they can. Out into the alien night they go, stepping beyond the airlock into the lethal cold. Their suit lights cut narrow beams through swirling dust as they venture forth. Where would they head in such desperation? Perhaps to a backup lander, or an emergency shelter pre-positioned miles away, if one exists. Or maybe toward a cache of resources dropped for contingencies. Weighted down by suits and fear, they press on across the dunes, tethered to hope and to each other. Mars offers no mercy to travelers on foot. The landscape is beautiful and deadly, a vast expanse of night with only a distant horizon to aim for. We can picture their footprints trailing behind them, each step heavy in the low gravity, until a rising wind begins to erase their passage. Did they make it far? Did any survive long beyond the shelter of the base? The answers dissolve into the darkness of that imagined night. Back on Earth, the first sign of trouble was a haunting silence. One day, the scheduled check-in from Mars simply did not arrive. Controllers waited, sending query after query into the void, but heard nothing in return, only the faint static of the cosmos. At first they wondered if it was a minor communications glitch, something not unheard of when solar interference or a dust storm on Mars disrupted signals. But hour after hour passed with no reply. In mission control, voices grew quiet and faces tight with concern as they called out the colony's name over and over across millions of empty miles, desperately hoping for any response that never came. Normally, streams of data flowed constantly from the outpost, vital signs of the habitat, each temperature reading and battery level a reassuring pulse of life. Now those channels were empty. Some recalled that just before the silence, there was a brief burst of garbled telemetry. Perhaps a final whisper of numbers had arrived, cryptic and incomplete. A sudden drop in pressure, an abrupt voltage spike, then nothing. Engineers scrutinized those last fragmented readings, searching for any clue in the digital noise that might explain what disaster was unfolding in that distant night. In the end, the consoles told an uncompromising story of an abrupt end. One moment the colony was there, alive in the data, and the next, it had simply gone dark. By the time a relief mission arrives months or years later, what remains? Perhaps the base still stands intact, but lifeless, as indeed it was found. Lights dimmed and systems halted after exhausting their reserves. Outside, the Martian winds have swept the surface clean. No obvious sign of the crew greets the rescuers, only the silent habitat like an empty shell. If equipment failure was the spark, it left only questions in its ashes. Mars is an unforgiving host to human technology. Fine red dust works its way into every seal and circuit, abrading moving parts and coating solar arrays in a dull film. The bitter cold of Martian night can cause metals to contract and crack, and electronics to falter without constant warmth. Even radiation from the sun, unchecked by a thick atmosphere, can scramble a computer's delicate brain. The colony's designers knew these risks and built in redundancies and shields. But nothing is ever truly foolproof in so alien a world. This theory of a catastrophic breakdown is a cautionary tale. It reminds us that even with layers of safeguards, life on Mars balances on a knife's edge of technology. A single cracked seal or a software glitch might cascade, each safeguard crumbling in succession. The colony was an engineering marvel, yet even marvels have their vulnerabilities. If indeed their machines betrayed them, it would be a quiet horror, technology failing not with a dramatic explosion, but with a slow, relentless unraveling of support that left the crew with dwindling options. Still, as plausible as a mechanical doom may be, not all who ponder the ghost colony are satisfied. Some point out that thorough as this scenario seems, it leaves threads untied. The investigation found the habitat largely intact, not charred by fire or ruined by an obvious blowout. Supplies and equipment were still in place, vehicles still docked at the outpost. If an evacuation on foot occurred, why were no traces of it ever seen? No bodies found after such a painful march into oblivion. It is possible Mars's shifting sands hid them, or perhaps the crew was swept far from the site. But the lack of concrete evidence keeps the question open, the theory unproven. So the mind turns to other possibilities, because a colony does not simply vanish without a trace. If it was not the machines that failed them, perhaps it was something within the humans themselves, an invisible crack in their resolve or sanity under the unending isolation. The ghost colony may have been undone not by metal and circuitry, but by the delicate threads holding together the human spirit in a place far from home. Thus, our focus turns inward, to the unseen struggles that no machine can repair. The human mind, though resilient, can wear thin under the weight of endless isolation. On Mars, each dawn brings a pale sunlight filtering through the dome, but no birdsong, no rustle of trees, only the same barren horizon and the quiet hum of machinery. Days and nights lose their meaning in the artificial cycle of the habitat. The crew goes through motions of routine, but over the months, something in their eyes grows distant. In low voices they share the same jokes and stories, each telling a little more forced than the last, trying to keep spirits lifted against the oppressive solitude. Far from home and confined to a handful of rooms, even minor frustrations can swell into giants. A misplaced tool, a misunderstood word. On Earth such things fade quickly, but in the cramped quarters of the colony they can fester. The astronauts were trained for this, taught to recognize stress and support each other. For a time, they likely did celebrate small victories, such as a successful harvest of lettuce in the greenhouse, a crewmate's birthday marked with a makeshift cake and a song, or a particularly beautiful sunset glimpsed through the habitat window. But as weeks turn to months, the psychological toll accumulates subtly, like a slow leak of air from a pressurized hull. Imagine one of the crew scribbling in a personal journal late at night, the only outlet for private fears. Perhaps the entry starts with hope and determination, but slowly the handwriting grows erratic, trailing into doubts. We haven't heard from Earth in so long. I can't sleep. Something feels off. Others might stare at the few family photos taped to their bunks, faces of loved ones a world away, and wonder if they will ever see them again. In the dim light, someone fights back tears of loneliness so as not to worry the others. They all feel it in their own way, that silent, growing weight on their hearts. Cracks in morale often appear innocuously. Maybe one morning, a normally cheerful engineer stays in his bunk, unwilling to face another monotonous day. His crewmates coax him up, but the smile he musters is thin. Another day, two colleagues might exchange sharp words over a trivial task, surprising both and leading to apologies in the tense silence afterward. These small incidents are like hairline fractures in steel, easily dismissed at first, but dangerous if ignored. Over time, trust can erode, and a sense of being utterly alone, 4 humans against a whole planet, might sink in deeply. Now picture the breaking point. It could have been a single event, or a culmination of many pressures. Perhaps one night a crew member reaches a point of no return. Overwhelmed by panic or despair, they decide they cannot stay a moment longer under the stifling dome. Maybe it is the biologist, eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination, who slips into her suit while the others sleep, driven by a desperate urge to escape the claustrophobic habitat. She cycles the airlock, stepping out under the cold stars without clearance. By the time an alarm sounds for the unauthorized exit, she has wandered several paces into the dark, alone. Alarm klaxons echo through the habitat, rousing the remaining crew to confusion and alarm. They scramble to the control panel to see the outer door ajar and a suit missing. Heart pounding, the commander grabs his own suit. There's no time to lose. One by one, the others don their gear hurriedly, minds racing with fear for their colleague. Out onto the surface they plunge, calling out through radio channels into the windy Martian night, pleading with their lost friend to stop and return. Outside, the landscape offers only ghostly shapes under the starlight. The deserters' footprints are barely visible in the dust. The crew fans out a short distance, suit lights cutting thin beams as they scan the emptiness. The wind carries thin whispers of their voices. Perhaps they catch a glimpse of movement on a distant rise. A lone figure, small against the vast plain. Driven by urgency, they follow. In the thin air and sub-zero cold, every minute outside is perilous, but they cannot abandon one of their own. They push onward, leaving the safe glow of the habitat farther behind. Communication becomes strained as their radios crackle with static. Maybe the terrain blocks the signal, or the rising wind drowns their words. We can imagine the fear tightening in each of them, not just for their crewmate, but for themselves as well, as they venture further from the only shelter they have. At some point, maybe a sudden dust storm sweeps in, curtaining the stars and turning the landscape into a blur of blowing grit. The desperate rescue turns into a struggle for survival. In such chaos, it's easy to lose direction. The crew could become separated, voices lost in the howl of Martian wind. One by one, their suit oxygen supplies dwindle. Perhaps one collapses, exhaustion and panic taking hold. Another might press on, refusing to leave anyone behind, even as their own strength fades. In the darkness, they might not even see each other's lights anymore. When the storm passes by morning, it reveals nothing but endless dunes and a pale sky. The habitat stands silent in the distance, its open airlock door a mute testament to the night's tragedy. No one returns through it. Inside, the lights remain on, illuminating empty rooms once more. The only hint of the drama might be scattered gear dropped in haste, or an urgent log entry cut off mid-sentence as the crew rushed out. The colony is a ghost once again. Such a scenario is painful to consider, yet it's one way the silence could have fallen. A psychological collapse need not mean everyone simply gave up at once. It could unravel the mission through one person's breaking point, igniting a chain reaction. It is a grim narrative of heartbreak and human limits. In this theory, the Mars expedition was undone by the human mind's frailties, the very thing each of them had battled quietly for so long. There are traces that lend this idea weight. investigators later found personal journals and notes that hinted at growing anxiety and depression in the team's final weeks. The humour that once coloured their logs had faded. References to bad dreams, to feeling watched or profoundly alone, began to appear. One log entry spoke of a crew dinner eaten in complete silence. Another mentioned an argument over a minor schedule change that left everyone shaken by the intensity of their own emotions. These breadcrumbs suggest the psychological strain was real and mounting. Yet, as compelling as these clues are, they stop short of explaining the final outcome. Space agencies choose individuals of exceptional mental fortitude for missions exactly like this. The crew would have undergone rigorous psychological screening and training to handle isolation and stress. Could even they succumb so completely? Supporters of this theory note that extreme conditions can drive even the strongest to their breaking points. Examples from isolated polar stations and submarine crews on Earth show that depression and conflict can take root anywhere. But skeptics point out that an entire team collapsing in unison stretches believability. There was no clear prior indication in their official communications that morale had collapsed to a dangerous level. No distress calls about crew conflict ever reached Earth. In the end, it remains a possible but unconfirmed explanation. If not the mind, perhaps it was something in the body, a hidden invader against which morale and machines were useless. The possibility of an illness, invisible and deadly, enters the story. Among the many dangers of distant worlds, the most insidious may be one too small to see. Astronauts travel with full knowledge of physical risks, explosive rockets, lethal radiation, vacuum outside every wall. But an invisible microbe, that is a foe with no warning. During the Apollo era, astronauts returning from the moon were quarantined, just in case lunar germs existed. Mars, with its ancient soil and possible traces of past water, had its own microbial mysteries. The colonists would have been careful, sterilizing equipment, wearing suits outside, vigilant for any sign of biological hazard. Yet the unsettling question remains. Could something microscopic have slipped through and flourished in their refuge? Illness in space is a frightening prospect. Even a common infection can turn serious when you're 140 million miles from the nearest hospital. The crew's medical officer had training and a small pharmacy of supplies, but only for known ailments. What if they encountered something new? Perhaps, sometime into their mission, one of the explorers began feeling unwell with vague symptoms, a persistent headache, unusual fatigue. At first, they might chalk it up to stress or a mild cold. But soon, another crewmate felt the same unexplained exhaustion, then a third. Imagine the creeping realization as they compare notes over a meager dinner. Something is going wrong with our health. Day by day, the sickness would tighten its grip. A cough that won't go away, low-grade fevers, strange rashes, or bouts of dizziness. Symptoms that could be nothing, or could be the start of a nightmare. The medical officer would do what she could. Check vitals, run whatever basic tests the lab allowed, administer general antibiotics or antivirals from their limited stock. Perhaps at first there's hope the treatment is working. One person seems to improve slightly, and relief spreads through the group. But then another collapses, shivering with a high fever that defies the medicine. The diagnosis eludes them, and dread settles in. Perhaps at that point, the crew attempted a quarantine, separating those visibly ill from the healthier members. They might have converted a corner of the habitat or a spare module into a makeshift isolation ward. But in such a tiny outpost, True separation was nearly impossible. By the time symptoms showed, everyone was likely already exposed. Whatever the pathogen was, it had already spread among them, moving silently from person to person. For the crew, fear and confusion could spark moments of friction. Someone might question whether a recent experiment or an opened sample jar had unleashed this scourge, or if a crewmate carried it unknowingly from Earth. Such desperate accusations would soon give way to the all-consuming fight for survival as the illness worsened. One by one, the colonists could have been incapacitated. We can picture the habitat's common room turned into a sick bay, sleeping pods dragged out to accommodate the ailing. The engineer, usually strong and active, now too weak to leave his cot. The botanist delirious and rambling about Earth's blue skies. The commander, hiding her own tremors as she moves from one bed to another, trying to keep hope alive. She records notes in the medical log with a shaking hand, detailing symptoms she doesn't fully understand. Day 3 of unknown illness. High fever persists, breathing difficulties worsening. Outside, the Martian wind blows ceaselessly, indifferent to the crisis unfolding within. How terrifying it must be to fall ill on Mars. Cut off from the world, the crew would have only each other and their wits to rely on. If they still had communication, they would surely send urgent pleas back to Earth. Mayday messages describing symptoms, requesting guidance. Perhaps one such distress call was attempted, filled with coughing and strained voices. But even at light speed, help would be months away, and that's if anyone was listening in time. It's possible that by the time Mission Control realized something was terribly wrong, the colony had already gone silent. We can imagine the desperation of the last healthy or slightly healthier crew members as they tend to the others. The doctor among them, if one still could stand, moving from bunk to bunk in a clumsy suit of improvised protective gear, knowing he can't afford to get sick too, but also that he probably already has. He adjusts IV drips with unsteady hands, whispers words of comfort he may not believe, and refuses to rest even as exhaustion darkens the edges of his vision. In a corner, medical supplies lie scattered, empty pill packets, used syringes, bandage wrappers, evidence of a fight against an invisible enemy. Eventually, the colony might have fallen eerily quiet. Perhaps 2 remain alive, then 1. The last survivor, feverish and weak, faces a fate few can imagine. What thoughts cross a mind in such solitude? The radio silent, surrounded by the still forms of friends. Maybe they made a final entry in the log, or a diary, a farewell on behalf of the crew, hoping someday someone would read it. With trembling fingers, they could have sealed the habitat, intending to prevent any pathogen from escaping, or perhaps to shield whatever future visitors might come. Did they put on a suit, in a last delirious effort to go outside, seeking a breath of cold Martian air to soothe burning lungs? We can only picture that lonely figure stepping out of the airlock, stumbling a few yards before collapsing under the dusty pink sky, leaving the ghost colony behind. This theory of a lethal outbreak is chilling, yet some evidence gives it substance. Investigators found medical equipment strewn about and cabinet doors left open in the infirmary, as if a frantic search for a cure or supplies took place. Logged data in the habitat's computer showed the air filtration system working overtime, possibly set to a sterilization mode, hinting that the crew detected something amiss in their environment. In personal notebooks, there were brief references to headaches and fatigue in the days before communications ceased, entries that seemed innocuous until viewed in hindsight. One offhand remark about a funny smell in the lab the day before symptoms spiked now feels ominous in retrospect. That the crew took note of these oddities suggests they were grappling with an invisible foe. These clues paint a picture of a medical emergency that spiraled beyond control. Still, the mystery remains. If a pathogen struck down the astronauts, why was nothing found when rescue teams finally arrived? No obvious contagion was detected in the habitat's air or water samples by the investigators. Of course, if the microbe was alien to Earth, the tests designed for known organisms might not have recognized it. It could have died out after consuming its hosts, or gone dormant, lurking undetected. The rescue team took no chances, donning biohazard suits and treating the site as a potential hot zone at first. But nothing definitive emerged from the lab analyses that followed. The absence of bodies also puzzles investigators in this scenario. If disease claimed the crew, one might expect to find their remains inside, perhaps carefully covered or arranged by any last survivor. Instead, there was emptiness. Some speculate that any survivors, fearing contamination of the base or driven by respect, carried their fallen colleagues out into the Martian sands to lay them to rest. A few disturbed patches of soil were noted not far from the habitat, suggestive of digging, though shifting winds had partly obscured them by the time they were examined. It's possible shallow graves lie out there under the dust, holding the answers to what happened, though none have been conclusively identified. In the annals of spaceflight, the scenario of a devastating illness is one every mission planner has contemplated with dread. The ghost colony could stand as a tragic example of that nightmare realized. Yet without proof of a pathogen, this theory remains just that, a theory. It hinges on fragments of evidence and a chain of unfortunate coincidences. The presence of a microbe, the failure of medicines, and the crew's inability to contain it. It raises as many questions as it answers. Did they fear a colleague's mental breakdown, violence, or even an illness they thought someone might unleash? That blank space where a name should be is an unbearable tease, one more void in a case full of them. If not a germ, what then could have decimated a whole crew and erased their presence? As we sift through possibilities, our gaze shifts again, from the microscopic to the all-too-human. Perhaps the threat was neither faulty equipment, nor fragile minds, nor rogue microbes, but instead a darker side of human nature. In the silent halls of the Mars base, could the real danger have come from within the crew itself? A far more unsettling scenario lurks in the shadows of speculation. That the colony was not undone by accident or nature at all, but by human hands. Could the greatest threat have come from within the team itself? History's remote expeditions have occasionally seen camaraderie give way to conflict under duress. In the age of sail, ships have faced mutiny. Even in Antarctica's endless night, stories whisper of companions turning on one another. On Mars, a place as isolating and pressure-filled as any on Earth, is it conceivable that such a nightmare unfolded among the 4 highly trained astronauts? Tension can be a silent poison. Perhaps disagreements that once seemed trivial. How to ration supplies, how to conduct a risky experiment, or even personal slights magnified by close quarters, grew day by day. The crew was carefully chosen for compatibility, but no selection process is infallible. Imagine a seed of distrust planting itself in one crew member's mind. Maybe it started with subtle defiance, a refusal to follow an order, or secretive behavior noticed by others. Over time, sides could form, alliances and resentments crystallizing beneath polite smiles. One theory imagines a particular breaking point. Perhaps one astronaut, let us say the chief engineer, became convinced that the mission was doomed, or that the commander's decisions were putting everyone at risk. Paranoia might have taken hold. In this scenario, The engineer might sabotage equipment to assert control or force an evacuation. For instance, he could quietly disable the communications system, cutting off contact with Earth to ensure no one could countermand him or call for help. The crew awakens one morning to find their link home dead by no obvious malfunction. Anxiety and confusion spread. The commander attempts to steady everyone, but the engineer stands apart, a volatile look in his eyes. We can picture a confrontation in the command module, voices echoing in anger where once there was cooperation. The commander demands an explanation. Perhaps she's discovered tools out of place, evidence that someone tampered with the radio or the oxygen filters. The engineer finally snaps, accusing her of leading them to ruin, perhaps insisting that the only way to survive is to abandon the mission plan. Other crew members hover in the doorway, hearts pounding. Loyalties are tested. Do they side with their training and commander, or with the colleague whose fear seems to border on delusion? In a small habitat, there's nowhere to retreat from an argument spiraling out of control. What happens when trust completely breaks? In a flash, a shove turns into a struggle. We can imagine the engineer lunging for a control panel and the pilot grabbing his arm to stop him. A scuffle ensues, pushing and pulling in the low gravity as alarms start to blare. Perhaps a wrench is raised as a weapon, or a heavy flashlight. A cry of pain rings out. The greenhouse's calm greenery bears witness to a flash of violence as a glass panel shatters, or a chair is knocked over. Maybe the lights flicker as critical systems are caught in the melee. It's a scene no one on Earth would ever expect to unfold in that carefully planned outpost. If such a fight occurred, its aftermath could be devastating. Maybe one crew member lies motionless on the floor, while another is injured and bleeding. Panicked and angry, the remaining two might make a split-second decision to flee the habitat, either chasing the perpetrator or escaping what's become a danger zone. An emergency alarm could be howling as the airlock cycles open in the chaos. Imagine two figures stumbling out into the Martian day in a desperate grapple, and two others, barely suited up, following in a haze of adrenaline and fear. Outside, the conflict might have continued on the rusty plain. Perhaps the engineer, if he was indeed the saboteur, runs toward a rover or some shelter, and the others pursue him across the open ground. Harsh words and frantic shouts crackle over suit radios. In the thin air, each footstep is thrown high by the low gravity, lending a grotesque, slow-motion quality to the chase. Maybe a blow is struck, and a helmet visor cracks. A white leak of oxygen begins jetting out like a tiny comet tail. The fight would be on two fronts now, man against man, and each against the unforgiving environment. In such a scenario, none of them may survive long outside. A suit breach means a quick death, if not sealed. Even without a breach, suits only carry so much air. If the confrontation led them far from the base, they could exhaust their supplies before making it back. One can envision the final moments. The engineer, furious and frightened, realizes his bid for control has doomed them all. The commander, determined to stop the madness, refuses to let him out of her sight, even as her gauges warn of dwindling oxygen. Perhaps the others try to intervene, or maybe they too fall one by one, as exertion and panic consume their limited air. When the dust settles, literally, the outcome is a silent, empty base, and no sign of its crew. In this grim theory, Mars did not kill these pioneers, at least not directly. Instead, human fear and fury did. The colony becomes akin to a ship found adrift with no one aboard, the result of a mutiny that left all hands lost. Is there evidence for this dark possibility? Investigators did note some oddities. In the control room, a console was found with deliberate damage. wires pulled out, as if someone had yanked them free in haste. The communications array, upon inspection, wasn't broken by natural causes. It appeared manually deactivated. Not a single distress call or emergency signal ever reached Earth. If conflict erupted, it likely did so under self-imposed radio silence. Additionally, one of the interior doors had scratches and dents, as though something hard had struck it repeatedly. Could that have been the site of a struggle? Analysis of the habitat revealed a cracked helmet faceplate lying in a corner, and what might have been a few drops of dried blood on the floor near the airlock. Though with time and dust, it was hard to be sure. One of the heavy repair tools that should have hung on a rack was also missing from the habitat, an absence that raises further questions. These clues are tantalizing, yet not definitive. Crew diaries and logs provide further hints. Most entries were routine and cooperative, but the last few logged events showed signs of strain. One log entry abruptly ends mid-sentence, as if the writer was interrupted. Another, later found hidden behind a storage locker, contained a chilling line. "I fear what art might do," the name smudged away by a smear of unknown substance. Was someone afraid of a crewmate? Such a fragment feeds speculation that interpersonal violence could have occurred. Critics of the mutiny theory are quick to point out that these astronauts were the best of the best, screened for psychological stability and teamwork. The idea of them descending into lethal conflict seems far-fetched to many. But others counter that extreme conditions can reveal fault lines no training could ever fully eliminate. There are precedents, however rare. Isolated military outposts, long sea voyages, even a notorious incident at a remote polar station where stress and confinement ended in tragedy. On Mars, any such breakdown would be magnified by the absolute isolation and the impossibility of escape. Yet, like the other scenarios, a murder or mutiny on Mars leaves unanswered questions. If a lone survivor somehow walked away from a deadly clash, where did they go? No rescue ship ever found a person wandering, nor any clear footprints leading off indefinitely. If everyone perished in a final struggle outside the base, why has not a single remnant of their bodies or suits been discovered? Mars is vast and can quickly cloak evidence in dust. But it's unsettling to imagine that every trace of 4 people could simply vanish. The sabotage theory paints a portrait of human darkness, an expedition doomed by the very people meant to ensure its success. It's a story almost too tragic to accept, that after surviving the vacuum of space and the descent to Mars, the crew could not survive each other. And still, for all the drama this theory conjures, the physical proof remains frustratingly inconclusive. The habitat's scars are ambiguous, the logs fragmentary. We are left with haunting possibilities rather than certainties. In the end, whether it was betrayal or breakdown, the evidence from the ghost colony refuses to settle neatly into any single narrative. What does remain are the tangible pieces of that mission, objects and recordings, marks and remnants that speak in riddles. To truly seek the truth of the vanished Mars expedition, we must examine those remnants closely. The artifacts left behind hold the final whispers of the crew's fate, offering clues that illuminate one moment and deepen the mystery the next. The empty habitat has become an archive of ghosts. Every object and mark left behind is a silent witness to whatever happened here, each carrying a whisper of the crew's final days. Walking through the base now, one can almost sense the lives that once filled it. There is an eerie intimacy to the scene. Personal belongings lie where they were last set down. Tools and devices await owners who never returned. These unsettling discoveries are the puzzle pieces investigators have tried to fit together, the only voices left to speak for the vanished. In the galley, a metal cup still sits on the counter, its contents long evaporated, but a dark ring staining the bottom. Nearby, a meal pouch and a fork rest on the table beside a chair that's slightly askew, as if someone stood up in a hurry. It looks as if dinner was interrupted, the crew's supper abandoned mid-bite. Such a sight raises unanswerable questions. Did an alarm sound that pulled them away urgently? Were they arguing, distracted, so that food went cold and uneaten? The simplest domestic scene, a meal, now turned into a riddle. Down the corridor in the command module, a leather-bound logbook lies open on the desk. Its last entry trails off in a scrawl. The date and time are noted, and a few lines of routine report in neat handwriting. Then a jagged stroke of the pen runs off the page. It's as if someone was writing calmly, and then suddenly stopped, perhaps standing up abruptly, or knocked sideways. The page after is blank. Investigators handled this log with reverence, noting how the ink's tail suggests the book might have flown off the desk in low gravity. Was the writer thrown from their seat by something, or did they drop everything to respond to a crisis? That single unfinished sentence is a frozen moment in time, tantalizing and frustrating. Whatever interrupted that writing remains unknown. Not far away, the crew's EVA suit lockers stand open and empty. Not one of the 4 suits remained on its rack when the rescue team arrived. This fact speaks volumes. Whatever occurred, the entire team likely donned their spacesuits and left the pressurized safety of their habitat. Whether they marched out in an organized evacuation or scattered in frantic escape, we do not know. But the absence of those suits confirms that they ventured into the Martian outdoors. It's a haunting sight. Hooks and hangers with nothing on them. Outline marks on the walls where familiar equipment used to rest. The investigators could easily picture the crew grabbing helmets and backpacks in haste. Perhaps alarm klaxons were wailing at that moment, red lights flashing across these very walls. The image of all 4 suits gone is one of the clearest pieces of evidence we have. And yet it explains nothing by itself. It only tells us that the final act of the crew took place outside, under the alien sky. Step by step, the investigators catalogued the oddities left in the colony. In the maintenance bay, they found a panel open and electronics exposed, as if someone had been in the middle of repairs, or sabotage. A tangle of wires protruded, one of them deliberately severed. The broken ends were clean, not frayed, suggesting a tool had sliced through. On a nearby workbench, a toolkit lay sprawled out, and notably, a heavy wrench was missing from its slot. The rescuers searched carefully, but never located that particular tool. The absence of something so solid is unsettling in itself. Did someone carry it off into the desert, or is it still out there buried in the dust, dropped during a struggle? Elsewhere in the habitat, more clues hint at a story without spelling it out. An interior door bears faint scratches, and a couple of dents in the metal near the latch. It might have been from normal wear, or it could be the result of someone pounding on it in panic or rage. In the greenhouse module, a section of glass was cracked from the inside, a spiderweb fissure across a pane that once held pressure in. Investigators found a few specks of dried blood on the floor beneath it. Do these suggest a violent scuffle, or simply an accident as ill colonists stumbled about? Every mark in these rooms is a cipher. A cracked glass panel could mean an outburst of violence, or it might have fractured under stress when the power failed. Both interpretations seem plausible. In the end, each scratch and crack can be read in different ways, depending on which theory one leans toward. One of the most intriguing pieces of evidence was discovered only after a thorough and almost obsessive search. a small personal diary tucked behind other books on a shelf in the sleeping quarters. Its existence wasn't initially obvious. Perhaps its owner hid it intentionally. This diary belonged to one of the crew, though which one was never publicly revealed, and most entries were benign. But on one of the final pages, there was a deeply unsettling line hastily scrawled in pencil. "I fear what Uck might do," the name smudged away by a swipe of graphite. Whoever wrote this was afraid, profoundly so. It's a single sentence of dread that raises as many questions as it answers. Did they fear a colleague's mental breakdown, violence, or even an illness they thought someone might unleash? That blank space, where a name should be, is an unbearable tease. One more void in a case full of them. The digital records offer their own puzzles. The habitat's computer logs show an unexpected manual override of the communications system. Sometime during the period when Earth lost contact, the transmitter was deliberately turned off. There's no note explaining why. Perhaps a crew member shut it down to conserve power during an emergency. Yet power was available, and protocol would favour keeping the line open at all costs. Alternatively, it might have been switched off by someone who didn't want anyone to call for help, or to report what was happening. We know that after a certain point, not even a static signal came through to Earth. The base went radio silent by human intention, not by equipment failure. That decision, whether born of malice or misguided strategy, sealed the colony off from any outside rescue that might have come. Likewise, environmental data logs show a spike in certain activities around the time of the disappearance. The life support system logged an unusual surge in air filtration cycling, as if the system was set to scrub contaminants at full power. This occurred shortly before the station went quiet. Was it an attempt to purge a toxin or pathogen from the air, lending credence to the illness theory? Or could it have been triggered by dust or smoke from an internal fire or conflict? The machinery doesn't tell us why it was pushed to its limits, only that it was. Step outside the habitat, and more mysteries greet the eye. The rescue team scoured the vicinity and found subtle disturbances in the reddish soil. A set of footprints, mostly erased by the wind, trailed a short distance from the airlock before vanishing on hard ground. A few meters further, another set appeared, converging as if two or more people had met or caught up to each other. Then nothing. Mars's shifting sands are adept at hiding its secrets. By the time help arrived, only scant impressions remained, and those too were fading daily under the sigh of the atmosphere. At one spot, not far from the base, the ground had been visibly disturbed, as if something had been buried. The team gently dug there, finding nothing but sterile soil. Was it a grave dug and then emptied by wind, or just an odd formation of terrain? They could not be sure. Another 100 meters beyond, a scrap of silvered fabric turned up against a rock. It was identified as a piece of an emergency blanket, the kind found in the colony's survival kits. It fluttered in the thin breeze as if placed as a signal, though no one could tell who left it or why. It might have been torn off in a struggle, or purposefully left as a marker by a crew member hoping to be found. In the end, it was just another ambiguous token, waving forlornly with no explanation. There were cameras too. An automatic camera mounted high on the exterior mast had recorded a short, puzzling video during the colony's final hours. The timestamp corresponded roughly to the time Earth lost contact. In the grainy footage, investigators could make out the habitat's door opening and two suited figures emerging into the dim Martian afternoon. The image wavers, obscured by dust or static. Only silhouettes can be seen, moving strangely, perhaps struggling or carrying something heavy. Moments later, the recording ends abruptly. Whatever happened in those moments was cut off, leaving imaginations to fill the gap. Taken together, these artifacts and clues form a collage of contradictions. Each discovery seems to illuminate one facet of the mystery, only to cast darkness on another. The empty suit racks and faded footprints strongly indicate the crew went outside, but they cannot tell us whether it was in hope or terror. The damaged equipment and blood hints at violence, yet could just as easily be explained by frantic repairs or medical emergencies. The diary's warning suggests internal strife, while the heightened filtration suggests an invisible threat in the air. Every piece of evidence supports one theory or another, and none can be woven into a single, coherent story that satisfies all questions. For the investigators, and for the loved ones of the crew, this has been the cruelest aspect of the ghost colony. There is evidence of tragedy, but not its cause. Each theory we explored earlier finds both support and opposition in these mute objects. And beyond what was found, there is what wasn't. No bodies, no final messages directly explaining their fate. Only silence and uncertainty linger in those dome halls. Even now, years later, the artifacts remain where they were, preserved by the cold and dryness of Mars. The base is a time capsule of that fateful day. The chairs and beds, the tools and personal mementos, everything sits as it was, awaiting the return of souls who are long gone. It is a heartbreaking tableau of absence. Photographs of children and spouses still adorn the walls, smiling into emptiness. A beloved music player with a dying battery lies in a bunk, eternally paused on a favourite song. These human touches remind us that an entire world was built here, a home filled with hope and routine, until suddenly it wasn't. In the face of such poignant clues, one can't help but wonder if the truth of what happened will ever fully be known. The evidence is ample, but ambiguous. Investigators piece together timelines and scenarios from them, but the colony keeps its secrets close. Perhaps one day, a new mission will uncover a definitive clue, a buried black box recording, a hidden message overlooked, or even remains that escaped the search. Until then, we are left with the unsettling discoveries already made, forced to draw our own conclusions from the traces in the dust. As we close this chapter of speculation and remembrance, we find that the story of the ghost colony is not a closed book. Each artifact and observation is a question mark beckoning further inquiry. Theories have been woven and debated, but the threads of evidence have yet to tie into a single tapestry. Mars still holds the final answer somewhere in its silent expanse. In the next part of our journey, we will look to what can be learned from this enigma and explore any new insights or revelations that might emerge. The fate of the vanished Mars expedition remains an echo in the halls of its empty colony, a riddle waiting patiently to be solved.